As soon as we get a green light here, we'll start. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January 8th, 2019 meeting of the Edina City Council. Roll call, please. Ms. Allison?
Member Fisher?
Here.
Member Staunton?
Here.
Member Brindle?
Here.
Mayor Hovland?
Here. We have some preliminary matters to address this evening. We've got a new council member joining us, Ron Anderson, and we're going to, first of all, swear him in. So we're going to do the administration of the oath of office. Sharon Ellison, our city clerk, is going to take care of that. And then we'll get Ron on board and working. And so Sharon's going to go down and take care of that. And then we're going to get some photos with his family members that are gathered in the back here to celebrate this, his election and his joining us as part of the Edina City Council. Ms. Allison. I think she wants to give you a microphone.
I, Ron Anderson,
Do solemnly swear under oath
do solemnly swear under oath
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States and of the state of Minnesota,
of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of council member
of the office of council member
in the city of Edina
in the city of Edina,
of the county of Hennepin
of the county of Hennepin,
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Welcome.
He hasn't forgotten you, just momentary. He's got to get that briefcase situated. And then
Yeah,
we'll get those photos.
of course. Yeah.
Big smiles, kids. Oh, baby, look over here. Just a couple more. Here we go. She's gonna regret that bald head in all these photos. Very nice, thank you. Thank you.
And now we're going to swear in our colleague Kevin Staunton, who was reelected in November.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kevin Staunton,
I, Kevin Staunton,
do solemnly swear under oath
do solemnly swear under oath
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States and of the state of Minnesota,
of the United States and of the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of council member
of the office of council member
in the city of Edina
in the city of Edina
of the county of Hennepin
of the county of Hennepin
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
So help me God.
So help me God. Thank you.
All right, folks, the next matter on the agenda is the approval of the meeting agenda itself. Manager Neal, anything you wish to modify on the agenda?
No, there isn't.
Okay. Any council members wish to modify the agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the meeting agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Next is community comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the council on a matter of concern to them this evening? And you'll have 3 minutes. Not something that's on the agenda. We'll get to the public hearing, but if there are folks in the audience that have another issue they want to raise with the council, you should certainly think about coming forward. Good evening.
Tricia Rubenstein, 4812 Maple Road.
And I'm Dan Shan, 4824 Towns Road. And we just wanted to comment on a communication that was sent out via email and then posted to the website regarding the 50th in France SAP. So I just want to say that it arrived on Monday the 7th, and it was basically to clarify the details of the 50th in France SAP, and I know that we're not covering that tonight, so I just wanted to bring this up. The clarification explains that the plans that were shown during meeting 3 and subsequently on the city website were incorrect due to some miscommunications, and this means basically no one has really seen the 50th in France SAPs. So at this time, we don't have any timetable for completion of the 50th in France SAP, or really any credible information what that looks like. So it's led to a lot of confusion, and many have turned to the city planning department to get some questions answered, but they've basically come away unsatisfied. So the 50th in France SAP could have a significant impact on the residents in the White Oaks and really deserve to be a part of the process. So basically what we'd like to do is be able to be part of the process, and essentially we'd like to see a timetable for completion of that SAP and have that communicated publicly, as well as at a public meeting so that we can review and give feedback to that plan once we see it based on the approved and corrected plans, and that the plans be made available online about a week prior to that so we have some time to review it. And this would help address all the confusion in the neighborhood, the discontent about not being involved in the process, and then also provide a more clear understanding of what the impact would be on the neighborhood. And then Tricia just had a few other comments.
Okay,
In
thank you.
November, I went to the planning office to ask to see hard copies of the plans that were posted in hopes of seeing a site plan, something that wasn't a 3D rendering of basically massings. And I was informed that no plans were actually hard copy plans available in the planning office. So I'd also like to request, quite respectfully, that they include having available hard copies that includes a measured and scaled site plan, not just these 3D renderings that look very hard to understand what these spaces are in between the neighborhood and the pedestrian ways, what there is for access for fire and safety. There's a lot of questions that cannot be answered in these 3D renderings that must be an AutoCAD plan where you can really start understanding the human scale of what this new development could look like. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks, folks. We'll
Thanks.
get to that. Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the council on a matter of concern to them? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Alice Hulbert, 7221 Terra Road in Edina, and my concern was with the walks with the mayor. It's not really a concern. I want to thank you for continuing to keep that up. I think it's so important to try to encourage physical activity among our citizens who maybe aren't so active, and to direct them towards places where they can walk this time of year. I just want to recommend that you do one of your walks at the Dome. It's an amazing facility, and for us to have that open, free track time almost every day it's an incredible resource that I think is under-publicized. So go over.
So
Pick it up one Sunday.
We did the Dome two months ago.
All right.
So we're just
Very
trying to move
good.
it around town a little bit in the
You'll have
wintertime.
to circle back and grab
All
it
right.
again.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for your work on all of that.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Hulbert. And for those who are interested in Walk with the Mayor this month, it's this coming Saturday, 9 o'clock. Meet at Starbucks inside Galleria. So we'll be there, and I think we'll have a good turnout. Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Hi, Roberta Castellano, 4854 France Avenue South. And I'm here standing here in support of my White Oaks neighbors. Wrote up a quick letter. Mayor and City Council, I join my neighbors in requesting another community meeting for the Edina Comprehensive Plan, 50th and France Small Area Plan process, so that we might be presented with corrected images of the current plan. The most recent renderings that were publicly presented date back to the October 23, 2018 community meeting number 3. Yesterday, January 7th, the city posted a news flash to the comprehensive plan page in which it was stated by the SAP co-chairs that some of the drawings associated with meeting number 3 were not correct. Just last week, on January 2nd, I filed a public data request with the Edina Planning Department under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, Chapter 13, in an attempt to learn more about the 50th and France SAP. I requested all of the data that document the event of, the content of, and the result of each of the meetings of the 50th and France SAP work group that have occurred after September 18, 2018, through to the date of my request, January 2nd. My understanding is that the work group has continued to meet after September 18. However, no record of any such meeting has been posted online to the 50th and France SAP homepage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Thank you. Yes, please, if you mind handing it to the clerk, and then she'll make it part of the record. Thank you. We haven't seen you for a while. It's nice to see you again. Anyone else on another matter of concern to them?
My name is Frank Lorenz, 7151 York Avenue South. I wanted to pick up on a matter that I spoke about at the last council meeting at the end of December, which is the intent to replace all of the fire engines that the city owns. That's a decision that was already made in December. And it's going to cost the city about $3.3 million, more or less. I don't know whether you're replacing 5 or 6 engines or intend to, but that amount of money, I assume, will require some bonding. And if that's the case, then the total cost to do this will be about 42% more than the $3.3 million, because of the interest on the bonds over the life of the bonds. The question is, the fire chief and fire marshal apparently felt that rather than replacing the engines every 20 years, which is the norm in the 185 cities around the metro area, that they would be better to replace them every 10 years, which is twice as fast. And the problem is fire engines today don't wear out. They just become more and more expensive to maintain as the parts become harder and harder to obtain. But there aren't that many fires in Edina. Most of the calls, more than 90% of the calls from that the fire department answers are medical emergency calls. And those are important calls, because the EMTs, and every firefighter is trained as an EMT, those people save lives, and they save lives when people have strokes and heart attacks, when people are involved in the horrendous automobile accidents that occur on the highways that go around and through Edina. So there's no question that the fire department has to have serviceable vehicles, but the question is, why do you have to replace them all at the same time? And the mayor's comment after I had made my comment as well, there's a danger that if the fire engines aren't all exactly the same, that the firefighters, when they get to the scene, will be delayed somehow. Well, that's what you said. We have you on tape, Mr. Mayor. But the question is, all of your firefighters were put through a rigorous training program at the fire academies that are run by the state of Minnesota. They all read, write, and speak English. Your answer is kind of a non sequitur. So if I recall correctly, the city manager is going to explain why it's the right thing to do to replace all these fire engines, but it seems like just a whimsical decision. We got some money, or we can get some money, so let's spend some money.
Thank you, Mr. Lorenz. Anyone else wish to address the council on a matter of concern to them that's not otherwise on the agenda this evening? Okay. I think we can address some of these issues that folks have raised, and I think Manager Neal, this is the portion of the agenda that we have now determined that there are appropriate responses to be made to community comments from the month before, and I think Mr. Lorenz, we could start from the back, or last presenter, and discuss this issue that was before the council, I think a few months ago now, about and then held over at my request because I wanted to understand, and I think everybody else did too, the need to have that continuity of operations with respect to the fire department equipment, because I've been on the council long enough where I know they used to replace chassis and replace engines, as Mr. Lorenz mentioned, but there was a pretty compelling case made for me personally by you and the chief as to why it's important to be using the same kind of equipment and have it age out at the same rate. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Yes, the most important reason to replace any piece of equipment, but particularly life-saving pieces of equipment, is that they provide better service to the people that we serve, and that's the people in our audience and the people in the community, particularly around fire and ambulance. Right now we have a package of vehicles that we brought to you in late 2018 that involved 3 fire engines and an aerial engine that we are replacing. We're replacing all 4 of those vehicles, 3 of those vehicles this year. They are in construction, or they're being manufactured right now. One of the advantages to replacing all of those vehicles at the same time is that you do get provided the same technology, the exact same technology on every vehicle, so that our personnel, and actually personnel from other adjoining fire departments who sometimes respond to fires in our community, can become familiar with the exact same technology and master it on every vehicle that we have. That's important. That provides a greater assurance of the top level of service that we can provide. The other advantage to doing that, to purchasing them at one time, is that it provides us the ability to get a better price. When we're purchasing 3 vehicles at one time, vehicles of this price range, we can do a better negotiation, we can get a better price on the vehicles overall. We intend to replace our ambulance fleet next year. Our ambulance fleet is a fleet of 4 vehicles. Those have a 5-year lifespan, so we intend, for the same reasons, to turn those over. They get more use. They're more akin to a police squad car than they are to a fire truck. So they have a shorter lifespan because they have a harder life in many sense. And for the same reasons, better technology, uniform technology allows us to provide a higher level of service to the people that we serve. And by doing this strategy, by having a vehicle that is not completely exhausted of all value at the end of a 10-year or a 5-year lifespan, there is a trade-in value at that point. And our analysis shows that we can make this purchase with our existing levy, with our existing tax levy that we already levy for the purposes of vehicle replacement, and we'll be able to save overall during this 10-year period somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million than if we were to go ahead and do these replacements on the existing vehicle replacement calendar. So those are the reasons that we do what we're going to do.
All right. Thank you. I think Director Teague, both Ms. Castellano and Ms. Rubenstein and her colleague had some concerns about the 50th and France small area plan, and it seems like there's some, at least confusion for some folks out there that, about what kind of timetable are we on, status of the plan, the status of the work that's being done by that group. And I think folks that are here in the audience tonight, I think many of them are familiar with what's going on at 70th and Cahill, have probably participated in some of those public meetings, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the type of process that we're using at 50th and France and where they are in the process and how that small area plan study group is composed. That might be helpful for everybody.
Yes, yes, certainly, Mayor and members of the council. So we've had all three of the community meetings that were scheduled. Some of the plans that were presented at that last meeting indicated some pedestrian paths, and there were some driveways on the west side of the plan north of 50th that raised some concerns with the neighborhood. Based on the feedback that the work group has been hearing, those connections and drive aisles essentially along the backyards of the properties west of Maple Road, the direction from the work group to our consulting team is to take all of those things out, not provide that in the plan. That was the feedback that was given from the community and the work group. So those will be coming out of the plan. The plan is still being drafted by our consulting team. I don't have specific hard and fast dates, but we believe that a draft of the plan will be completed by the 25th of this month, 25th of January. Once that is completed, we would post it on the website with the intention of bringing it to the Planning Commission in a work session. So the Planning Commission would probably take at least one, possibly two work sessions to discuss the plan. And they want to do that before any public hearings are scheduled. So once those work sessions take place, we would then set public hearings for both the Planning Commission and the City Council. So that likely would occur sometime in February, March. But from the time that the plan is posted online, the end of this month, we can take public feedback on the plan at that point. We can also, again, there would be public hearings held at both Planning Commission and City Council. But a lot of the concerns that we have been hearing from the community, the work group does intend, the draft plan will reflect those concerns.
Okay. And the work session meetings of the Planning Commission are public meetings, and people can certainly attend and listen to the dialogue. They're not public hearings where they'd be able to participate.
That's correct.
In the conversation, but there will be a point in time where, just like with the 70th and Cahill small area plan, there was a public hearing before the Planning Commission, and then there would be a subsequent public hearing before the City Council, and we'll continue to take public comment in written form all the way up to the time, I suppose, it gets to the council. And
yes.
Then we'll take both written and verbal testimony at the time we have a hearing here on the small area plan.
That is correct. Those work sessions are held prior to regular Planning Commission meetings. So that would be at 5:30 here at City Hall up in the community room. And they would be posted as a public meeting. Okay.
And our usual posting sort of methods, so folks should do what? They should watch the website for those postings, or how they get notification?
Correct. Watch the website. We would send out notice through the City Extra. So if anyone is signed up for that, whether it's Planning Commission agendas or I believe the adjacent neighborhood associations, we can send out a blast that way as well.
Okay, good. Other? Member Staunton?
Just a question, and maybe this is something to bring back to us in another meeting if you don't have the information, but I'd be curious about, for the 3 community meetings that were held, what kind of efforts we went through to publicize those. How do we circulate information? I know we typically do a wide variety of things. I'd be curious as to what those are. And like I said, I don't want to catch you here. You may not have that readily available, but at our next meeting, perhaps it'd be a good. I'd be interested in understanding that.
Certainly, we can do that.
Thank you.
Manager Neal, any other responses to prior community comments from other meetings other than the one raised by Mr. Lorenz?
Otherwise, we're caught up.
Okay, good. Thank you. The next matter before us on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda?
I do.
Member Brindle?
Thank you. I would like to remove item C.
All right. Anyone else wish to remove another item? All right. With the exception of 5C, is there a motion to adopt the balance of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda with the exception of 5C. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. 5C, that matter deals with a potential resolution 2019-01 designating the official newspaper for the city of Edina for 2019. Member Brindle.
Thank you. I actually pull this off every year. I am always concerned with whether the distribution of the Edina Sun Current reaches a majority of our residents, all of our residents, which I know it doesn't and never has. But we pay money to designate the Edina Sun Current as the official newspaper, and we rely on that newspaper to inform residents and interested folks of all of our public meetings. And now with Edina Sun Current being a voluntary sign-up, you have to enroll, basically, in order to get it. So I have no idea what percentage of Edina residents are getting or receive the Edina Sun Current. So I would like to know what our distribution is, and to find out if it is the right. Is it the right newspaper to inform everyone of our public meetings? It isn't the only way that our public meetings are publicized. They go out in a variety of ways, but it's one that costs us money, and it's one that we officially designate every year. So I want to make sure that we are getting what we need to get out of it. I have something else here. So, yeah. So that's the reason that I want to pull it off is to just and a request to have a City Extra press release and go out and say this newspaper is important. If in fact we pass this resolution is important. This newspaper is important. This is how our message gets out to our residents. And to inform people who may not yet realize that, particularly, we've got lots of new neighbors in our neighborhood, that they have to enroll in order to get the Edina Sun Current.
Manager Neal or Director Benarad, any comment about the potential designation of the Sun Current as our official newspaper?
Thank you, Mayor Hovland and Council. As of September 18th, the circulation of the Edina Sun Current was 6,500. So that answers your question of circulation. There is another option for legal notices, and that's the Star Tribune. Honestly, while they have a nice saturation in Edina, I don't yet know that we can compare apples to apples with circulation there. I would point out that the Sun Current was ranked higher in our 2017 Quality of Life Survey as a source of information for residents. Beyond the kind of function of it. Maybe Clerk Allison can comment a little bit more about rates or that sort of thing.
And Your Honor, we do need to designate tonight.
I was going to
First
ask you that.
regular meeting, so it's not a...
All right.
Mayor Hovland, member of the council. In fact, I was looking at trying to compare rates from the Star Tribune and Sun Current, because the Star Tribune did submit a bid in late 2018 to become our designated paper, but we simply did not have time because we did not feel like the rates were apples to apples. And so my suggestion is that for 2020, in 2019, we take a look at comparing both papers and bring that to you for a discussion to see if you would like to consider the Star Tribune. And at the same time, the Star Tribune has just started publishing public notices. And last year, in 2018, they only had 2 cities that use them to publish their public notices. Otherwise, it has been the Sun Current or the equivalent of the Sun Current in other cities that have been publishing public notices for neighboring cities. So we do plan to bring that back bring it to you in 2019 for a discussion.
All right. Thank you. Member Fisher.
So 2 years ago, when Councilmember Brindle brought this up, I actually had way more concern than I have tonight. 2 years ago, your only option was to hope some delivery person would decide in that given week to come down your block. And it was about a 50-50 proposition. This new setup, if you invest 2 minutes and sign up to get the Sun Current, it will be in your mailbox every week without fail. At least it has been for us. And to me, it's free. So every person in our community has the same opportunity to have it delivered and sitting there each week. I do agree that we should continue to find ways to remind people, to get people's attention and increase that volume of circulation. I think that's going to be important. But I think that's the right vehicle for our community. That is the newspaper that has exclusive news and information about this community.
Okay. Any further comment, Member Brindle? Otherwise, I'll
No,
ask
I
someone
just
to move
wanted
the
to
matter.
bring it up because I think that we need to be diligent about making sure our news gets out.
Sure. Okay. Would someone care to move Resolution 2019-01, which designates the Sun Current as our official newspaper for calendar year 2019?
So moved. Second.
Got a motion second on that matter. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the resolution as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right. The next matter on the agenda this evening is special recognitions and presentations. We don't have any this evening. Ms. Lee, welcome. And we're going to move on to the public hearing portion of the agenda. And you folks are all fortunate. You won't be here till 1 in the morning. We only have one public hearing tonight, and that's first one up is the 70th and Cahill Small Area Plan. And Director Teague is going to introduce the matter, and then we have Susan Lee from our Planning Commission here who's going to make a presentation about the work that was done, the good work that was done.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the Planning Commission. Before Commissioner Lee steps up, so Commissioner Lee is one of the co-chairs of the 70th and Cahill Work Group. Just to quickly give you a little background on the Planning Commission over the last month or so. So the Planning Commission had a work session on November 14th to consider the plan. They then held a public hearing on November 28th, and then they made their recommendation on December 12th. On December 12th, a motion was made by the commission to approve the plan as written. That motion failed on a 4-4 vote. A second motion was then made to approve the plan with 2 changes. That motion passed on a 5-3 vote. The changes that were talked about or recommended are in regards to height and density. Those 2 issues first came up at that November 14th work session that the Planning Commission had when discussing and going through the plan. It was at that meeting that members of the commission asked staff to put together some language on how to address their concerns in regard to the potential of increasing density, specifically to provide for affordable housing, and then 2, to deal with how the plan deals with height. As written, the plan suggests increasing height within this neighborhood node by making changes to the zoning ordinance. So the two changes that the Planning Commission are recommending is, one, in regard to the density, move the density requirement into the land use chapter. That would be similar to the Southdale area plan that doesn't talk about density within the plan. Rather, that's listed out in the land use chapter. So the recommendation is to shift that to the land use chapter and also provide a provision that says that density could be increased from 50 units an acre, which is the recommended max here, up to 75 units an acre if three things are accomplished through a rezoning process. That would be providing at least 20% of the units within that development for affordable housing, and two, reaching goals and objectives of the small area plan, and then three, to include some of the public realm improvements that are suggested in the plan. And the second recommendation is in regard to height. So rather than amending our height overlay district to increase height, currently it's 2 and 4 stories. The recommendation is to increase height to 3 to 5 stories. So rather than make that amendment by right through the zoning ordinance, the suggestion is to follow similarly to what we did with the 44th and France plan. And that's establish these recommended heights, the possibility of increasing height from 2 to 3 stories on the west side and potentially 4 to 5 on the east side. So those heights could be increased only through a variance or rezoning process and not given by right. Essentially, that would give the city a little more leverage in going through a potential site plan review or a rezoning. So with that, I will conclude that's the Planning Commission recommendation, and Commissioner Lee will present the plan in full.
Let me hold Commissioner Lee for a moment. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to inquire further of Director Teague at this point in time? Okay. All right. Commissioner, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and City Council members. I'm pleased to be here tonight to represent the 70th and Cahill Small Area Plan and Work Group. As its co-chair, I'm Susan Lee on the Planning Commission, was co-chair along with my fellow Commissioner Jerry Strauss. Excuse me, Jerry Strauss, also Planning Commissioner and co-chair. And I did want to say that I was not able to be at that Planning Commission meeting, and although it is true the motion did not pass, had I been there, it would have passed because the vote would have been 5-4. So we're here tonight, and both us as commissioners, co-chairs and commissioners on the Planning Commission are recommending that you approve the plan as is without the further edits, and I think my presentation will cover some of the points. I wanted to just go quickly through our project timeline. It has been a long time since this started, but it's also a good review for the public on how our small area planning process works. Back in August of 2017, the City Council asked the Planning Commission to get started on a small area plan for 70th and Cahill. At that time, our Planning Commission approved the small area plan green print, which essentially allowed us to form a work group under the Planning Commission to study the area and develop a plan. We selected our work group members. We received 21 applications and selected 7 individuals from that to form a work group of 9 members with the 2 co-chairs. In October, we had our first kickoff meeting, and from October and November began to meet twice a month and worked having a lot of discussion around the idea of vision for the area and guiding principles. We quickly ran into the holiday season and found that our meetings were starting to taper off a bit, and so most of our public meetings took place from December of that year through March of the following year. We indeed had the 3 public engagement sessions during that time. After March, we took all that input along with the information that we studied, and from March through September of 2018, essentially we're drafting up the chapters, reviewing them, again, sort of on a more or less a twice monthly basis. At some point, the final editing went into a final editing subgroup of the work group of 4 members, and they proceeded to work on it until issuing the draft in September. The Planning Commission did review the draft in one session in November, one work session in November, and then they reviewed it, as you know, at their Planning Commission meeting last month, which brings us to this month. We are now before you for final approval. There has been some question about how do small area plans work, and I think the overriding factor is that it is a huge benefit to the city to have some idea of how to implement development for an area. So it helps us to gain an understanding of the neighborhood issues and concerns through public forums. It hopefully establishes a collective future vision based on that input. And now we have a roadmap to achieve that vision. It will take that vision and use the land use regulations to guide the future development, and do this by setting public realm form and design standards in the zoning updates. Of course, we hope to also update and complement the city's comprehensive planning goals. This is a good time to look at this area. I think it's pretty evident that given the ages of the buildings, that redevelopment proposals are very likely to come before the city within the next decade. It is an opportunity for us to be very proactive in saying that we have given this a lot of thought, collective thought and energy into developing what is best for the entire city, and ultimately, obviously, incorporate it into our comp plan update. Our plan follows the chapters and the layout of the overall comprehensive plan. There's these topics, as you can see. The green arrows designate the chapters that we chose to include in our small area plan. Not all small area plans will use every chapter of the comp plan, obviously, depending on what their needs are. But they are, in fact, designed to mimic the comp plan for easier incorporation. The small area plan process will always have 3 phases. So the startup is obviously what I talked about. We appoint the work group. We either have a consultant or we hire consultants, and we have a kickoff meeting to get the work group started. The second stage is the planning process, which is very critical in terms of getting and gathering community engagement. And we also need to gather that input and synthesize the data and then begin drafting the plan. The areas, the boxes that are green on this slide indicate where we take in our public input. So we try to have input at each stage. We are now in the final stage, the plan approval. And again, as you had just noted, there's always a public hearing for the Planning Commission review. And now we are in the final stage, the City Council review and public hearing. I did want to recognize our planning team. A planning team is always made up of volunteer residents, and if there is a business or commercial component, obviously business members. We had a 9-member group, and if our work group members are here tonight, I would like them to stand up, and I will just read the names. So we had, obviously, I mentioned Jerry Strauss, my co-chair, Connie Carino, a resident, Alice Hulbert, a resident, Jeff Moline, commercial property owner, Tim Murphy, commercial property owner, Christy Neal, a resident, Phil Peterson, a resident, and Kyle Udseth, resident. Thank you for... Thank you for that, because I was going to say they put in a lot of dedication to get to this point, and I think nobody realizes just how much you're signing up for until you get to the very end. Our consultant team you're familiar with. Our lead was Beco Associates with Bill Smith. Our market researcher was Economic Development Services with Jana King. Our public engagement specialist was Dan Edgerton with Zan Associates. And our design was headed by Tim Griffin of Tim Griffin LLC. Before we began the engagement process, we wanted to make sure that our work group was aware that this is not starting at ground zero. A lot of groundwork had already been laid through the 2015 citywide Vision Edina, which was and is our strategic plan. There was one key takeaway that the group was given, and that is this quote from the plan. The community should further examine and consider the development of small neighborhood-based business nodes to provide a range of local amenities and services. We felt that was very critical to the development of this plan. So our public engagement process had our, as I've stated before, our kickoff meeting on October 5th with our work group, followed up by the 3 public engagement sessions. We were trying to do one every month, but with the holidays in there, kind of fell December 9th, February 3rd, and March 3rd. I wanted to just review a few key executive summary points. Our executive summary is a bit different from the 44th and France Small Area Plan in that we did not see it as a shortcut to the plan, but rather an opportunity to emphasize what we felt were really important takeaways. We hope that this will spur the users of the plan to actually go for more detail in the rest of the document. It is an easy read, and it is primarily graphic. So I think it's very important to say that executive summary can only say so much in words. But for what it is, it was key that this was all about the node. And in fact, that the city of Edina is very fortunate to have these, as many cities don't have nodes. They really don't. They're lucky sometimes if they even have what we call a downtown area. So these nodes need to be protected if we choose to retain them for the future. Beyond that, there was something about the history of this location with the Cahill, former location of the Cahill School, the monument, that it had some historical significance that had a very village-like feel. So that village idea is what the work group coalesced around and said that is really a great image for us to go forward with into the next decade or two. The last takeaway all involved connections, and we realized that if there's anything about the node that has suffered in the past or needs to be improved in the future, it's about connection. Make people aware that it's there, people outside the area, make sure that it's there by improved wayfinding, use it as a place and an opportunity to provide some underrepresented housing types, such as missing middle housing. Use that fortuitous location of the bike trail now to become the focal point for a reason for people to come here and stop here who are using the bike trail. Consider a connection to the industrial area. Is it worth exploring adjoining that area with the industrial area and bringing people to freely flow between the two areas? And then, of course, always keep an option for future rail or transit due to its proximity to the rail line. Economic vitality was really the essence of what we need to do in order to revitalize this area. So by that, it was determined that the city has a large part as playing in this particular goal. They're going to need to take the effort and step up to encourage and support the small independent commercial businesses that the residents so highly desired. And they need to do this through the formation, and not just lip service, but actually actively support a formation of a business and property owner association for the 70th and Cahill Village area. Then consider the new residential development in light of needing to support new businesses. And then, as I mentioned before, the option to expand the geographic scope of the market area with improved linkages and connections. Our plan is pretty heavy on the land use chapter, as is our original comprehensive plan. But within that, the 6 key takeaways were, again, the village scale, defining the character in the scale, allowing a residential component, and keeping the residential options varied, a variety of building types. In the height, allow a variety of building heights between 3 to 5 stories. And I should say that does not rule out 1 story. We currently have 1-story buildings, but what it's saying is it is a range of variety. And then the density, a density range of 10 to 50 dwelling units per acre. We do this in the land use chapter by using a building height limits plan. This plan will allow for more building height on specific parcels within the study area. The idea is to transform it from what is currently a 2-story, 24-foot height overlay to allowing, through the zoning, 1 to 5 stories in conjunction with compliance with other requirements of the plan. The land use designation will change. Currently, it's neighborhood commercial. This table is taken directly from the comprehensive plan. It is actually exactly the same as the neighborhood commercial designation, with the exception of the text that is in white. So as you can see, the goal in the neighborhood node designation is to introduce those specific form-based components that zoning will now require. So in this case, under development guidelines, the plan recommends that the development comply with the following guidelines from the 70th and Cahill Small Area Plan: building height, building type, and site specific. Under density guidelines, the maximum density range, which is now currently, I believe, somewhere between 6 and 8 dwelling units per acre, shall be allowed to be a range of between 10 and 50 dwelling units per acre. This is not to say that every parcel will have 50 dwelling units per acre. Some will have 5, some will have 8, and some will have 10. But as long as a proposal or a project is between that range, then it is acceptable as long as it also meets the development guidelines. So this is an example of a building type guideline. The plan is specific and includes requirements for architectural character, materials, and massing within the zoning regulations. For example, building materials. It's specific to say brick, stone, metal, and glass storefronts. Architectural elements, cornices such as lintels, sills, bays, upper stories will have smaller window openings, window mullions, pitched or flat roofs, shingles, and dormers. This was an attempt to reach out to sort of that historic scale that a village might have. Floor heights would permit 12 to 15 feet on the first floor in expectation of a multi-use building with commercial on the first floor, and then up to 12 feet on successive floors. And last, a podium base. This was to establish the street wall pedestrian realm in that it should be a height of basically the first story and step back from that front facade to maintain the visual street wall. As far as site-specific guidelines, the plan also includes requirements for public realm improvements within the city's zoning ordinances. It included these 5 particular items: a new pedestrian crossing at 70th Street in Edmondson, the requirement for internal circulation street layouts, and requirements for adding open spaces or Woonerf-type gathering spaces. Parking requirements, landscape parking buffers, a Cahill gateway, and of course maintaining future options for a rail station or transit stop. What you see here are examples of form-based code. These are actually the code itself. Their diagrams can be inserted directly into the zoning ordinance to clarify what those expectations are. Parks, open space, and natural resources was an important element of this plan because of the bike trail. So in order to prioritize the bike trail, the plan will emphasize the recently completed 9 Mile Creek Trail as the new focus of the node. So the steps taken to do this would be, we would be asking the city to prioritize 70th and Cahill improvements in the CIP process. So that means that the city will drive the development of this area rather than relying on the development proposals to appear before some action can be taken. To improve the wayfinding signage on 70th Street and add additional wayfinding for the bike trail. And then also it was identified that there needs to be additional survey or study of the traffic patterns between Lewis Park and the node, which we discovered were essentially none. Many families utilize the park for sports and activities. Very few choose to come to the node afterwards. If there's a reason for it in terms of pedestrian or bike or automobile circulation, that probably is something that would be well worth studying to facilitate better connection. And then the city-owned parcel in the study area should be developed as parkland and potentially a stormwater retention area with a water feature. How do we accomplish this? Well, this transportation and street design goals actually prioritizes, schedules, and oversees the reconfiguration of the node. So again, it focuses heavily on establishing that grid system early of the interior streets and intersections, and to improve and focus on the pedestrian connections to and from the node, considering early the east-west grand entry street, and adding the circulator stop to link the 70th and Cahill node, and entering into discussions with Metro Transit to improve stops and locations, as well as bus shelters on 70th and Cahill Road. I just wanted to say a little bit about the implementation, and I think it was pretty evident in the Planning Commission discussion that there are many different levels of understanding about this. I think that as a Planning Commission, a relatively new Planning Commission, we have essentially learned on the job, if you will, at a time where most of the proposals that came before us all had to be negotiated. And that was something I think that the work group was pretty clear about, that they're really yearning for a time where we can have our zoning be relevant again and actually understandable for residents in terms of expectations. So the successful implementation of this really does require that our zoning be looked at and that those changes be incorporated right into the document. So that's going to take form-based zoning, something we do not currently have in our zoning. Many cities are doing that now. This is based on something called the SMART Code, and in the planning circles, it was first introduced by Duane Plater, Zybrick and Company in 2003. Since then, hundreds of communities have adopted it and incorporated and tailored it to their own use. So I just wanted to read two things from the code, which I thought captured the issues that we as a Planning Commission have been struggling with for the past 4 or 5 years. Form-based zoning focuses on what the desired look, feel, and character of a place should be. Form-based zoning ensures that a community will not have to scrutinize all proposed projects because the intentions of the citizens will have already been determined in the process that leads to the code. So if the City Council chooses to approve the plan may be included by reference in the 2018 Edina Comprehensive Plan Update and will be forwarded to the Met Council for approval. The city then has 1 year from the date of amendment to bring the zoning ordinance into conformance with the comp plan as well as all its small area plans. I can stand for any questions.
Yeah, questions for Commissioner Lee at this point in time?
Your Honor, I have several questions.
Member Anderson.
Good evening, and thank you for your hard work. It's evident that there was a great deal of thought and concern placed into your plan, and I appreciate the movement towards farm-based coding. That little pocket in there at 70th and Cahill can be spectacular, I think, in terms of drawing attention. Now, the questions that I have, though, are pretty specific to the whole plan, and I don't know that that's available here so that people can see it, because I really have it kind of designated by page even.
I do have a copy of the plan, so maybe if there are some things that we can sufficiently describe,
okay.
I can answer the question.
Well, yeah, on page 47, which is it's in the land use and urban design section. Let me get to that.
Yep, that is what, it illustrates the proposed site guidelines. So the site guidelines, that's the portion that we spoke about that would be incorporated into the zoning.
Yes. So my question there is that the north side of 70th, contains a fair number of multifamily residential buildings, both in the plan referenced under multifamily residential on page 47, and just in investigation driving through. It's pretty clear that that constitutes a segment of the city's current affordable housing, that essentially the naturally occurring affordable housing. And so I'm a little concerned with where the northern boundary is there, because it encompasses those. And if the small area plan were to be approved with the changes as recommended by staff and at the request of the Planning Commission for definition, if those were approved, I would be concerned there that it might create incentive for those buildings to come down and redeveloped, in which case we'd lose quite a few affordable housing units, current affordable housing units. And I'm just kind of wondering if the study group considered that at all, or if you came to any conclusions when looking at that.
The study group early on, and I think it's just a great cross-section of our residents. Some were very, I'd say, not in favor of affordable housing. I think others were saying this is something we must do, all the way from one end of the spectrum to the other. They were directed that whatever the city's affordable housing policy is, this plan will abide by. Mm-hmm. So if there are some requirements or changes that are being made to facilitate affordable housing, I would recommend that needs to go in the greater comp plan and not be identified in small area plans themselves, because obviously by default they have to follow that. So the current affordable housing policy actually does have an item that states that the city will recognize affordable housing and can consider the following incentives for developments that provide for affordable housing, and one is density bonuses. So that opportunity, or that is always available and still is available to the City Council and the Planning Commission. Now, as far as that housing there, I think you raise a very good point, and that is we haven't, as a city, I think, identified yet where our naturally occurring affordable housing is. But that is something I think the council will have to consider as far as protecting what we have. And again, I see this policy as growing in terms of having some points about how you do that. When a project clearly affects something that's already affordable housing, you may elect to choose otherwise, choose a different tactic and grant yourself some leeway to protect it in some manner. So the north side of 70th was, the reason it got included in our study area was at one time there actually was some commercial on that side, and I think there might be a few offices in one of the buildings, but it was also because it was housing. And in some ways, we felt it was a good fit for this concept of a village that has housing with it. So without that on the north side, we really are just looking at a straight commercial area, a commercial industrial area. So that was the reason. It wasn't any more thought than that. And there was not extensive discussion about protecting it as affordable or recognizing it as affordable.
Okay, thank you. On pages 55 and 56, I'm noticing, let's get to that. On 55 and 56, goals and policies. And what I notice is
This is document page 35.
Page 35, I think, of the chapter, but it's page 55 of the report of the plan.
Yes, exactly, but she doesn't have the full report.
Oh, I see.
Oh, just got the document.
I thought. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you did.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay.
Thank you.
Member Staunton?
I'm sorry, I'm not. Is it in the Heritage Preservation chapter?
Yeah, it's on goals and policies.
It's
that
document page 35.
Yeah, it's document page 35, and in the plan, page 55 and 56.
Which? I'm sorry, I'm still not. In the document, it's page 35.
Mm-hmm.
In the printed document.
Right. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can we proceed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Member
thank you.
Anderson. Yep.
Goals and policies. So ensuring graceful transitions. The language that I notice here is that there's a requirement that development adjacent to development that is adjacent is designed with sensitivity to mitigate any impacts on neighboring properties in consideration of views, sunlight, shade, and noise. And I just wonder if you have any comment or thought to, again, to go to the amendment or the changes that are recommended, if that enters into the graceful transitions that you reference, or if it can have any effect on that.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So you're saying for the things that are, the language changes that are being proposed, if that impacts that?
Okay.
Is that what you were saying? That
Yeah.
the language changes?
I mean, additional height probably blocks some sun. That's all. And if it's simply a question.
Yeah, I think that would impact that. Yes, definitely. I mean, it would be something that, as you can see right here, the thinking was that taller buildings, if they are going to have greater height, probably the center of the parcel or the study area could sustain it better than the outlying areas, simply because that's where our residential areas are currently. So the plan is trying to retain sensitivity to those border areas to keep the height down, and that was the thinking in terms of 70th and Cahill, right at the corner, keeping that lower rather than allowing greater height there. But as it slopes away from that corner, that greater height might be allowed.
Thank you. On that same line, on page 56 of the plan, character and scale calls for a transformation of the commercial site to a mixed-use village node with housing, retail, services, unified by a common village theme, reinforced by architectural character and scale, building materials, and themed signage. Now, I know that we don't currently provide for architectural review or oversight, but I'm wondering, given the nature of this plan and the movement towards the type of design and farm-based zoning or coding, master planning, if you will, that I think that the plan intends, is that something that could be considered maybe simply within this node, or have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It was seen as this node of all is probably going to undergo seismic change. I mean, when you think about 50th and France and 44th and France, they are nodes, but the character is pretty much established. These buildings are probably reaching the end of their lifespan. And in some sense, when you look at the city of Edina, it was initially built without much of a plan. If a city were to be built today, it would certainly have a lot of form-based zoning involved. So you have an opportunity at this point in time to actually start that. And this node in particular has a lot to say for that, because most likely they will be developed pretty much around the same time frame. We made the assumption as a work group that when the first one goes, it will probably start something, and therefore the need to make sure that everyone's on the same page on that as far as what we want to end up with.
Okay. And then moving on to Table 3, I'm on page 58 here now. 70th and Cahill, the neighborhood mode characteristics, Table 3. It in general, calls for small to moderate scale commercial, residential, or mixed-use buildings. And I'm wondering if you feel that the plan adequately reflects the intended zoning movement from neighborhood commercial to neighborhood node, given those guidelines.
Yes, as I explained before, this table doesn't differ all that much from our current neighborhood commercial. What it allowed us to do, and it actually was first implemented and designed in the Wooddale Valley View small area plan, it allowed us for the first time to specify these design guidelines. As I mentioned, it's up on the screen. It's the white items with that specificity. You can see how it reads otherwise. These things are pretty general. Instead, it's saying neighborhood node is now going to come with it several more specifically tailored requirements.
Okay. I'm going to just stick with me here for a few more minutes. 62 and 64 on the in the plan. It kind of goes through building type guidelines, moving all the way through, and there are some pictorial examples, especially on 62. And I'm sorry that the audience can't see those, or maybe there's a way for that to be shown. But in any event, there's pictorial examples of some 4 to 5 story mixed-use developments that, and I'm wondering, is that the model that your 50 dwelling units per acre is based on, or is? And I think that the idea there is that these those heights at say 60 feet, 62 feet would be in the southeast or the most southerly portion of the site there. And I'm just wondering if this pictorial representation is what the work group had in mind.
Yes, interestingly enough, the one you're referring to is the Onyx, and
yes.
It actually had, we were surprised as a work group to find out it has a density of, I believe, 50. 50 units,
50,
dwelling units
yes.
per acre, but it is on a much larger, it's a very large parcel, so it was a great example to indicate how density is not a good predictor of what a building might look like.
Yes.
But yet, the work group felt that there needs to be some examples to kind of give a range of ideas of what could potentially come forward and the type of scale and massing that you might be looking for as the city.
Okay, good. If this plan were to be approved at 75 units, what type of height would you speculate on there by going to that type of density? And again, I understand it relates to the building itself.
Right. Yeah, again, there would be no way for me to actually say what that impact is. But as far as the density, they were very, very controversial issues. In some ways, I wish we could have taken that out of the discussion purposes, but because of the Met Council, that's how we define it. I truly believe it's more in terms of the height of the building that people identify with, and I think very much so they have a right to understand that. So I think for the density, if there could be a case made for some reason that that is known, that its density needs to be greater, and it's for other than affordable housing, then something would need to give. But as I mentioned before, the option to go greater in density for affordable housing is in the city's affordable housing policy. So the other danger is to specify with such great specificity 75. I fear that soon that will need to change yet again. So rather than stating any top number, it seems to make sense to retain that language in the affordable housing policy and then exercise it as a planning commission or a city council during the time that you will be reviewing it for the affordable housing units.
Okay, all right, thanks. A couple of other items on page 87 under transportation. You have a study referenced. Transportation study here. And basically, it notes that the area daily traffic really is very stable and it really hasn't changed much over 10 years, and that's daytime traffic. And so I'm just wondering if part of this study, or whether there was conversation when you received the study about drive time traffic. I just noticed that on 70th there's 2 lanes there. And so I just wonder about what happens at drive time?
We receive the data from our consultant, and I think that what you're feeling is sort of the same reaction our work group has, because many people live in the area. So there will always be that issue of the times where it backs up. And ultimately, what we had to conclude is these numbers have some accuracy to them. There are probably times where it exceeds this or backup times. But to create the additional density here was supported by the current numbers. But any proposal that will come before us as a planning commission or city council, we will get a new traffic study that will obviously supersede this. So we had the information that said that this area can bear the additional development. The roads can substantiate it. However, it was also noted that intersection of 17th and Cahill right now is just a three-way stop. That is a problem. So whether it needs to be a roundabout in the future or a traffic light, it's something that would have to be on the docket for study.
Okay, last question. No, I think that's it, though. Yeah, okay, that's it. Thank you, Commissioner.
Member Fisher.
So, thank you for all of your work. So, Mr. Teague talked about these two amendments, and I want to set the density aside for a minute and just talk about building height. Because the way I'm reading it and the way I understood him describing it is the building height, instead of just you get it by right with this zoning, in essence, we would be keeping it lower by right, and you'd have to earn your way up to the numbers that are in your plan. And I'm hearing you say that you'd prefer not to do that. I think the advantage of what he's proposing in that idea is that we can assure that we're getting some of those benefits that we want in order for the developer to reach that maximum height, or not even the maximum. If they even want a 4-story building, they would have to do things or to help, build out the public realm, whatever. What would be your concern with, and again, I'm taking this density out of the equation, just that height element. I'm curious what you think about that.
First of all, I think that the height recommendation is relevant. I think this work group spent a long time and a lot of deliberation along with the public in weighing in on that height. So you can be confident you have a good number there. The second thing is, currently it is zoned, I was not aware that there were 4-story permitted in the area. It was my assumption it was 2-story, 24 height in the commercial area. To artificially keep that low essentially says that your zoning ordinance is out of date. And as you heard, the recommendation is these are the requirements that the work group is confident in. This is the opportunity to make those changes to the zoning ordinance and get the public realm that you want without having to negotiate. So although our tactic has been in the past to use it as leverage and negotiation, the danger is there's always somebody who wonders, did you negotiate enough? Did you get enough? Is that really what we wanted? It also puts a lot of pressure, I think, on the execution of that, whether it just be city staff or planning commission or city council members, for taking the responsibility of having gotten the right public realm. If it's simply codified, it's clear what developers need to do. And I think that's the most honest way in some respects for even developers from the beginning know what is expected and it's factored in.
So if I could just follow up with that. So in your idea, and you were very clear that we have that 1 year to actually modify the zoning to fit the plan, you would codify, here's what you need to do as a developer to hit that, if you want to do a 5-story building or even a 4-story building on certain sites, these are the expectations to get there. Mm-hmm. And you feel, so my concern is that if we put that height in, they just come in and say, well, I don't feel like doing, that extra sidewalk or that, and where is the lever that we have to make sure that we can build out all the great things that you're showing in the plan. And if you're, I just want to make sure we have a vehicle, if not this vehicle, that there's another vehicle out there that we get that. And we don't know. It's not in front of us because it's the next step.
Right. Well, I could give you examples of form-based zoning. And so what would happen is they don't get the 5-foot by right. And it could be the same for the 3-foot building. Maybe he only wants a 3-foot building. He doesn't get that by right because the height is every bit as important as the public realm improvements. So in addition, you'd have your checklist. Okay, great, you met the 3-foot. Where's your green buffer here? Or where's the open space? We're requiring 25% open space per footprint or coverage. Where is that? How do you have it distributed? That's your time to weigh in and leverage. And in fact, in some ways, it's more efficient because it permits the city, and I will say it's a great thing if they can meet it, and then by right they should be granted it. It saves time from the standpoint that not every single proposal has to come before the Planning Commission because it's now asking for a variance. And multiple different opinions about whether I like it, I don't like it, I think that does it, I don't think it does it. So yes, it's two different pathways to what could potentially be the same result, although I think that what we've experienced over the past few years has shown that there's some varying opinions on whether that was successful or not. So if this is the time, this might be the time to try to attempt, at least with a small area plan, to make a move in that direction of more form-based code.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you one question about the density. How did you arrive at 50? Why not 40? Why not 60? What was the magic of 50?
Well, we studied all the projects we had in Edina as of recent date and looked at the densities, looked at the acreage. That gave us an idea. And it was just mind-boggling because they would look so different. We also knew that we were working within a certain height range. So if something was, 7, 8 stories, we didn't necessarily look at that project. So it was not exactly scientific, but it was the best we could do with the information. I don't know how anybody else would do it. We looked at the projects that had been approved by the city already and the different densities. Quite a few actually were in that range. So it was a general consensus that still gives a lot of room for growth, as the current density right now, as I mentioned, was I think 8 or 6. It's just very, very low.
And I think what you realize is what we've realized over time is that density as a measurement is such an abstract thing that and I think the diagrams, the pictures in your plan. By the way, overall, I really liked all the different examples and the images in the plan. I think they're very useful. But it really isn't a very good indicator. It's too bad we really are required to use density because it becomes a confusing thing. Because really, you could change the number of bedrooms and units and change the density dramatically. And maybe there's some benefit to that one way or another. But I was just curious how you arrived at that number.
It certainly wasn't a number picked out of the air because I know that our work group was just adamant about we got to understand this, we need to understand this, and then it became clear that you really can't understand it much more than just looking at a lot of examples and looking what the city has approved in the past. So with that, we were confident that this would give enough range for some good development and that it would also be doable within a 5-story limit.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. Member Brindle.
Thank you. I think the most challenging part of a small area plan is the fact that you have a variety of individuals around the table, many of whom don't have the connection between what makes sense for height and density and what financially can be built here. And so that's the piece that that maybe the comparisons that you made between projects that are approved, projects that have been built, and what could be built here, possibly the information gathered by those projects indicates some financial feasibility in what can be built at 70th and Cahill. However, every site is completely unique. The 70th and Cahill site, specifically the Waldorf-Nevin site, is going to be a very expensive site to develop. There are two commercial businesses that leave behind environmental cleanup that is very expensive to deal with. One is a filling station, and the other is a dry cleaner. And this dry cleaner wasn't just a pick up and go. This is where the work happened. So that is a polluted site. I am not a professional, but I can categorically say that's an expensive site to develop. So when looking at developing that site, we're not just looking at the parking garage that goes into it and the building that builds up from the ground up. We're looking at, I don't know, $500,000, potentially, possibly more, of digging into the ground and abating the environmental problem that exists there. So that leads into, you've got any number of developments in our city. You've got some that don't have any issues at all. Somebody comes in and says, I want to put this there. I don't have any issues. I'm not going to do affordable housing. So this is what I'm going to do. And the affordable housing policy allows them to participate and still not build affordable housing. So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying there are so many variables in what can be built, how it is going to be built, and who ultimately can afford to build there. And what ultimately gets built there as a compromise resulting from the cost to build there. So there are lots of good examples in this vision. I see it as a vision. It's a visionary statement, about 70 pages long. And there are some nice examples in it, but it really is a starting point. Now, when I look at what the Planning Commission requested as some of the edits for this document, I think what Member Fisher mentioned a moment ago really does speak to me. By rights, they can build 5 stories. They can come in and do that. They can decide whether to put affordable housing in it or not. They can decide if it's mixed use. They can do what they want. And the plan allows them to do that. And I guess I need to understand form-based code better to find out where is the leverage that you get within form-based code. If the plan says up to 63 feet, you can have anything you want up to 63 feet as your maximum, whether it's 4 stories, 3 stories, maybe you've got a huge plinth and then a smaller building above that plinth. Who knows? But you've got a 63-foot limit. And I think time will tell. It really requires, in my opinion, that the land use chapter, the zoning ordinances in Edina be stronger in order to provide some of those levers that we use all the time. They're used at the Planning Commission. There is negotiation. I don't know how you're going to get around that. Every project is different. We want different things in each site. This site right now has very little pervious space at all. And when we want to look at open space, and we say 50 units an acre, all right, 50 units an acre that allows us to have some open space, some pervious surface, that could be a narrow building, a narrow, taller building. Or it could be a wider building that doesn't allow water to seep in at all. I mean, that's what we have there. So that's where I am. I'm wanting to see some more understanding that the balance between the open space and height and density, and I'd like to see it in here. There is some of it in here, but for me, it's not a strong enough vision. I don't want to hold this back. I really don't want to hold the plan back. There's a lot of work to be done, but that's something that I would like to see more of in here is balance between open space and impervious surface.
May I respond to that? Because I think that's a very, very important point, what you said. And I would agree that it was a fine line where you're saying, how prescriptive are you going to get? And remember, this is a small area plan that has to accommodate a lot of different types of development.
Right.
So there is a huge step that has to go between here and what we have, our zoning. What you talk about today is based on today's standards, yes, by right, because all we have right now is height, density, and setbacks. So if you could envision that in addition there's another page that says here's the public realm requirements, then by right means you also had to meet these other things.
Right.
So, and like I explained before, they're typically more graphic in nature. And that has to show up on the plan before it can be approved. So by right is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, that is how you want your city planning department to run. If everyone could give you what you wanted, then by right, yes, you want to approve it. Mm-hmm. But yes, I would agree that current zoning right now, and that's where we've been finding ourselves in this gray area where it's like we need more, we want more. Mm-hmm. So this is hoping to define, here's the more we want. Let's get define it in terms of some of the form-based code we expect, and then now we can regulate it.
Okay. That's I think my biggest question. And
I would be happy to share some examples of what other cities have done.
Sure.
Yeah.
The edits, I'll jump to the edits, and then someone else can ask some questions. But I think that we can offline kind of talk about form-based code and get me more comfortable with it. But as far as the edits are concerned, and I think this question actually goes to Director Teague. I'm looking at the page 36, character and scale. Insert the following language at the end of this section. Well, that language, I think, could apply to any development that happens in Edina. It could apply to any small area plan. So I'm wondering, does that language really belong in this small area plan, or should it instead go in the comp plan, land use chapter, zoning, something that applies to everything?
It could be done both ways. I'm sure it's in other sections of the plan as well, but if that language goes along with the other recommendations in regard to height specifically. So if you approve the plan as is, that language is not necessary, what's suggested.
Okay, all right. Then on page 38, the table, why delete that table? Is that because it's going to be in the comp plan instead?
Yes.
Okay.
It just
All right.
simply
Okay.
moves it to another section.
Great. All right. And I guess my other comment on page 38, the building height limits plan, the building height limits are already in the document, and they're expressed a couple different ways. Is there any reason to insert this language in?
That flexibility language?
Uh-huh.
Again, not if you approve the plan as is. You would
Okay.
not need to insert that.
Okay,
You know,
great.
it's something we would, when we're crafting the zoning to make the zoning consistent with the comprehensive plan, we would look at that
Okay,
kind of language.
great. Thank you. That's what I have.
A couple of questions for you as well, Commissioner. And I just handed Director Benarott the transect that I think it's on page 40 of the plan, and I was just wait till it gets on the screen here, but this is educational for me. At some point in the conversations that you've had, with input from the residents and in the team itself, you decided to just kind of craft a proposal that takes us a linear look at everything and basically decided that nothing should be taller than the three-story buildings on 70th and Cahill, regardless of how much downhill they are from 70th and Cahill. So you've tried to level out that height to make the buildings, assuming there are buildings built there, that they would never exceed the height that's at 70th and Cahill, even though you might be down further east, downhill, and closer to the railroad tracks.
Yeah, this is, I'm glad you brought this up. It's a very unglamorous diagram, but really there was only one purpose. There was at one point discussion about, it just should be 3 stories because 3 stories, more than 3 stories at the corner of 70th and Cahill or along Cahill would be just too mammoth, next to the residential. This was a way to show our work group and convince everyone that, if you're really concerned about the height at that corner, the slope of the land actually slopes as you go down Cahill. So your 3-story building will actually drop down further. If you're really concerned about the height at 70th and Cahill at the corner, then let's use that as sort of the height that shall not be exceeded. And this was a way to demonstrate that you could get other heights, greater heights than 3 stories, and make everyone comfortable with it. It's not to say that there's going to be these mammoth blocks of buildings. It was really just to show some might be 3, almost look like 3.5. There's a 4-story. You could do a 5-story, but the developer decides to only do a 4-story. So it was just to give some idea.
Sure.
Of where that was.
Personally, I like the notion of nothing over 3 stories at 70th and Cahill. It just struck me that once you get east of Amundsen, you're further away from Cahill, which is a residential, and then further away from 70th, that there could be an argument you could accommodate more height other than just trying to keep everything level. So that's, right. And I was just kind of interested in how the conversation went on that.
Yeah, that was basically it. Yeah.
Okay. And then I thought Member Anderson raised an interesting issue on those properties, those 3 properties north of 70th Street. And Director Teague, we had a little sidebar there. So just so I'm clear in my understanding that whether it's neighborhood commercial as it's presently zoned or neighborhood node as it's proposed to be rezoned, there can't be anything but residential north of 70th. You couldn't have commercial property north of 70th, even though under neighborhood node you can have commercial property.
Correct. That site is listed in the plan as medium density residential.
Yeah,
the neighborhood node is south of 70th. It's within the boundaries of the study area, but it would remain residential.
Okay. One of the things that we've been doing in other parts of the city, think of the Southdale District recently, is when we've had developers come forward and want to use PUD, a planned unit development methodology, we have some give and take with them on securing the things that we want. It actually gives us quite a bit of flexibility in terms of being able to get those public purposes that we think are important to achieve, whether it's walkability, green space, stormwater management, all kinds of things of that nature. And this may be a question for Mr. Maddock as well as yourself. And first I'll ask Mr. Maddock, is there any other city that your firm represents that uses form-based zoning in its code?
No. It's something we've looked at before. It's been around for a while, but we haven't had anyone adopt it. Once you get to the implementation point, there's been some problems, or some perceived problems, I guess. And we've seen communities actually on the zoning side implement other tools. You mentioned one of them. PUD is by far the most popular, and it's becoming, from a lot of other communities' perspective, easy to administer to gain what you're looking for.
So in this, if this were rezoned neighborhood node and we adopted the small area plan requires adoption of form-based zoning, what are the potential dangers in using form-based code in that particular node?
Well, the form-based codes I've reviewed are very specific in what is allowed. And so one of the dangers is, have you thought of everything when you get there? Oftentimes you haven't. But as an applicant, if you come in and apply and you meet the criteria of the code, you get exactly what's allowed at that point. And one of the things we've seen with form-based codes is there's a lot of desire in terms of specific performance criteria, things of that nature, but sometimes there are competing uses, the intensity of the use being next to something else. And so I can't say I've seen it applied. We've certainly studied it and looked at it and identified some of the problems associated with it.
So with respect to neighborhood node, from a zoning standpoint, it's designed to encourage, I'm reading from the plan here, designed to encourage small to moderate scale businesses that serve primarily the adjacent neighborhoods. I think in the executive summary, it talked about it having an emphasis on housing. And so if you come along and you want to build a building that doesn't exceed 20,000 square feet, one might be residential and one might be commercial. You're subject to the same elements in that code under a form-based system.
As typically written, yeah.
Okay. And has that been the area where you've at least perceived some potential difficulty?
Some potential conflicts, yes. I mean, what you have to do is when you have those competing uses, residential, commercial, what have you, they can coexist. What we found is when you take a look at a specific use, that when you, say, administer the PUD process, you see what's in front of you and you build in certain criteria to minimize any of the competing problems. With the form-based, it's been our experience when we've looked at the various codes that you have to have thought of it all up front. And it's a little bit harder to do that. So that is exactly what we've seen.
And if I could add, the plan isn't suggesting that we have to do form-based codes. It's suggesting the potential.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody say that the small area plan requires adoption of the form-based zoning. It's just a recommendation.
As a potential.
Okay, all right.
But if there's a better way to do it, I think we would use that. But I think it's, as an idea, I think it's worth looking at. But the point is to develop the tool that gets what's in this plan.
Okay.
Helps us deliver it.
Okay. Good.
Thanks. I also wanted to clarify that what we're talking about here is land use, neighborhood node, and that is separate from the zoning. So the zoning, current zoning would not change. So if properties are designated as PCD1, what are we current zoning shows PRD2, those stay for those uses. So if they requested a change in the use, they would require a variance. It would be under review.
Okay. Okay. Continued as a guide as opposed to under the code.
Pardon?
This is intended to be a guide.
Yeah, it's It's broad-based, but I did make the comment that in order to properly implement it at this point, form-based code would be, for this small area, would be the preferred direction in order to ensure that the public realm, as it's laid out in the plan, was incorporated with equal weight as the height and the density.
Mm-hmm. And just so I understand what you said at the beginning, to be clear, the Planning Commission made a recommendation that the adoption of the small area plan include those two edits that are described in the resolution that we have before us tonight. But your study team, the group, is recommending that the plan be adopted without those edits, without those two edits.
That is correct.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. All right, other questions for Ms. Lee or staff? Otherwise, this is a public hearing matter, and we're going to open this up for public testimony. Just as a reminder, folks, best to use the side podiums unless you have an overhead that you want to have us see. Then you can go to the middle and somebody will hand you a handheld microphone. And you'll have 3 minutes. You'll get a yellow warning light when you've got 30 seconds left, and then you should be thinking about wrapping up. And we try to stay right at the 3-minute mark, so when the red light comes on, you should be wrapping up your comments. So feel free to come forward and give us your thoughts. Make sure you give us your name and address so we have that for the record as well. So anybody want to lead off?
Mayor, City Council, I'm Carl Schneider. I live at 5523 West 70th Street in Edina. What I'd like to say is my neighbor was involved in this planning situation for the last year, and I know the work and hard work that he put in. And that's why I am for the small area plan without the addendum. And I must say one thing after looking at it. Shame on staff trying to run this down our throat. That's not the way it should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, sir. Feel free to come forward.
Hi. Paul Johnson, 5501 West 70th Street. I really enjoyed this tonight, and I learned a lot, and kudos to all of you. You made one comment about, I think, a consultant saying that traffic was stable. I have the luxury of being retired and enjoying a cocktail during drive time. And from my catbird seat, I regularly see the headlights on Cahill going north, going down to at least Lewis Park. And that's during good weather. When snow, rain, it falls apart. So I would just caution you that I love a lot about the plan, but I think traffic really needs to be looked at and taken into consideration seriously, and be wary of consultants. I've been one.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Patrick Bennett, 5708 Kemrich Drive. I have spoke at the Planning Commission meeting back in November. I've written a letter to each of you except Councilmember Anderson. I'm happy to forward it to you with my thoughts. My wife has also written a letter. I've been very active in this process. One of my neighbors was also on the committee. I won't reiterate the concerns I've expressed on the record because I trust you've already been exposed to those. There are a couple points that were made tonight that I must address. First, Councilmember Brindle, you raised the Admonson project at the Waldorf Nevers. The concern that we have as residents here is that you have a group of people that volunteered their time and they worked against this without any knowledge that the Edina Housing Foundation purchased that lot. The council knew it, the city staff knew it. During the draft process, if there's knowledge on the council about the expense of the remediation of that lot, why was that not brought in to the small area plan team while they were drafting the plan? You had that knowledge. Why was that not brought forward? That's question number one. This is a compromise. The plan as written is a compromise with the best available information that existed. Consultants, there were developers that came to the meetings, both the working groups and the public forums. I listened to the developers talk about the balance between economics and the reality of the site that existed there. But when we don't have all the information and we don't have the experts there, it's hard to make a comprehensive compromise, but we've made a very good one here. Second, Councilmember Fisher, you talked about needing to maintain leverage by including the language in the amendment going forward. The concern that I have about this is we've had a comprehensive plan that has called for 10% affordable housing throughout Edina, yet we haven't lived up to that for existing projects. In fact, we have allowed those projects to go forward without reaching that 10% commitment, and now we are chasing. And now we're asking for language in an amendment that puts incentives in place to put twice that burden on this specific node, up to 25% to get 75 units. Why put that burden on this quadrant? Why on this little node when we haven't executed what the plan that's already existed? The 75 units of density is of great concern. The resident that just spoke about the traffic, there is not one 4-lane road that services this area. There's no way we can handle up to 75 units. There has been insufficient information about the impact on our schools and about the impact on traffic in the area. And so I'm very supportive of the plan as written because it represents a compromise exclusive of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Folks, I think Director Bennerott mentioned at the beginning that we try not to have any displays of emotion in here. There may be people with contrary opinions, and we want to respect everybody's opinion. So I think these understand that you support somebody's position on something. It's obvious by the applause, but it's not appropriate in these chambers. So we want to keep a kind of a level playing field in here and make sure everybody feels welcome and that their opinion is respected. And I don't want to have anybody intimidated by a round of applause or a round of negativity. It's just not Edina. It's just not Edina. It's not the way we act. So let's just maintain our composure and treat everybody in a civil way and not have these emotional reactions. Thank you. All right, who else wants to testify?
Mayor Hovland, council members, am I speaking loud enough for everyone?
You are.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jan Thorkelson. I live at 5527 West 70th Street, Edina. We've had a member of our community in our townhouse development on this committee and have received wonderful information and been kept up to date. The 70th and Cahill report was developed over many months of dedicated effort and thoughtful input from Edina residents and business owners. We request that you accept it as written. The City Council has assured the public that they would be kept informed and involved. If so, why hasn't there been a public hearing or any citizen involvement concerning this proposed, quote, edit or amendment, which is a monumental change to the SAP report? The Waldorf-Nevins property was sold out of bankruptcy to the Edina Housing Foundation during the time that the SAP was being developed. The Edina Housing Foundation is ignoring the efforts and intents of the SAP by proposing a 90-unit, 6 to 7-story, low-income apartment on that site. If you accept this amendment, the number of low-income units in the 70th and Cahill site could potentially reach 975, and also would allow the remaining area to be developed in the same manner. The Met Council gave the City of Edina a goal of 878 low-income housing units by the year 2030, which is 12 years from now. The 975 units, plus the 400 that already exist in the community or are being planned, would exceed that goal by 64%. The city's current affordable housing policy doesn't even address maximum density in one building or area or height limit. Given the importance of this decision, wouldn't it be advisable to do a review of that policy now? At this time, the Edina School Board is in the process of determining how many teachers and support staff will be cut for next year. They are also considering cutting vital programs. How would the increase in housing density proposed by this amendment impact the school system? According to the vision statement of the City Council, you have pledged to provide, quote, premier public facilities, end quote, for Edina residents. Do you honestly feel that the concentration of potentially 975 units of low-income property will encourage premier restaurants and other businesses to want to establish themselves in this area?
Ms. Turkelson, I need to have you wrap up. I let you drift over a little bit, but I need to have you wrap up.
Certainly.
Thank you.
My closing sentences, we strongly urge you to accept the SAP as written without edits or amendments.
All right, thank you.
Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Hope Melton. I live at 4825 Valley View Road in Edina. I am also coordinator of Edina Neighbors for Affordable Housing. There is much to like about this plan. Its deep interest in and respect for the history of the area. The plan expresses a genuine fondness for this small node, even in its worn and outdated condition. A great deal of painstaking, careful work went into the formulation of its visions, goals, and every single one of its chapters. The land use and urban design framework's goals and policies gave exemplary attention to connections, both within the village and the surrounding areas, to interaction and integration of its many uses with its public realm, to respectful scale and density transitions into surrounding neighborhoods, and to enhanced walkability, encouraging the use of bike paths and the bike trail, and minimizing the impact of automobiles. It saddens me, however, that some of the neighbors who did this excellent work somehow thought that once finished, it would be adopted exactly as it was written without significant changes through the city's approval process. I think this is a misunderstanding of the nature and purpose of small area plans as they relate to the overall comprehensive plan and the goals of the city as a whole. The difficult issues here were the inflexible height and density restrictions that would have precluded or made very difficult the development of affordable housing, whether intentional or not. These were inappropriately rigid and exclusionary and could not stand. Which brings me to my central point. There is such a thing as the greater good. Our new governor, Tim Walz, speaks of one Minnesota. There is one Edina, and for the good of the community as a whole, we need, indeed, the city is committed to, more affordable housing across this city for a broad range of households, affordable middle class and workforce rental and ownership housing, affordable housing for seniors and young families. This is being implemented across the city per the city's affordable housing policy. Governor Walz, in his inaugural speech, also said that our opportunities in life should not be determined by our zip code. The people who need affordable housing are probably not in this audience. Their need is no less important than the voices of those of us who are here. With the compromise edits recommended by the Planning Commission that enable the city to have the leverage and flexibility in response to rapidly changing market conditions.
Ms. Milton, I need to have you wrap up.
Yep, over a 10-year period, we now have a 70th and Cahill small area plan that welcomes all people to our community. I urge you to approve Resolution 2019-10, approving the 70th and Cahill small area plan with the Planning Commission recommendations. Thank you.
Mayor and council members, my name is Carol Bromer, and I live at 6521 Creek Drive. Our family has lived at our address since early 1970. Our oldest child started her education at the former Cahill School on 70th Street. We have frequented the shops at Cahill and 70th over the years. It is still a destination 5 blocks from our home for walking our dogs for more than 47 years. I am in favor of seeing the 70th and Cahill small area plan be approved. I would welcome a variety of new housing in that area, including affordable workforce options for teachers, healthcare workers, city service workers, etc., who wish to live and be part of the city where they work. The shopping area currently feels a little tired and in need of revitalization. The location is a natural draw for the surrounding private homes, existing apartment dwellings, and potential new housing. The inclusion of retail businesses and public space would create both a welcoming shopping destination and community gathering place. I urge the adoption of the 70th and Cahill small area plan. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Bromer. Other folks? Yes, sir, come forward. Good evening.
Council. My name is Philip Huang. I live in Coventry Way, which is pretty close to Cahill SAP. And I was involved learning this SAP plan like several weeks ago. And I did my personal study recently. While I search, I check the plan, which suggests have a 10 to 50 unit per acre, or 10 to 75 units per acre. When I convert it into population, which is current Edina is 2.35 person per unit, which is coming from the census government online. And then I convert it into the population density here. I can find if we really go into 50 units per acre, it will be 74,000 per mile square. So our currently highest population density in Edina is near the Edinburgh area. It's 16,448 people per square miles. So this is like 7 times or 6 times higher population densities will be created in this small area zone here. And if you compare to the density listed online, it's 4 times, it will be 4 times or 6 times to the highest one which Edinburgh listed there. So this is one of my concerns. This is a small area plan. If you increase significant people, like if taking as 50 unit per acre at 13 acres, there will be more than 1,000 and 1,500. Actually, it's 1,500 people could be living there, and then the new residents coming there also bring their kids, right? So in our Edina, currently the kids population is 18.3% new to the population will be at 80-year-old to 18-year-old. So that means it translates this new residents will be 280 kids for 50 units per acre, or 420 kids for 75 units per acre. These two options there. And so that means these several hundred kids, if we distribute into nearby Edina schools, which a CV, a VV, and a Edina High, that means 12 grades. Each grade needs expanded one more class to hold up the kids coming into there. So this is a surge of the population residents if we consider the proposed a unit per acre. And it's a big jump compared to the neighborhood, which at the population density is much lower.
I let you drift over. I need to have you wrap up. So do you favor the plan as proposed?
So this is my wrap up here. Please redo this SAP plan, which included school impact and the budget, and also exclude the residential part or limited to the 10 units per acre, which is already at the maximum density of Edina at 20% per acre.
Okay,
and also,
I need to have you stop, please. You're way over.
That's my.
So we're trying to treat everybody the same here.
So this is the fact check.
Do you want us to take your data and make it part of the record?
Yeah, sure. I can
sure.
present it.
If you hand it to the clerk, she'll make it part of the record.
Sure.
Good evening, council members.
Good evening.
Mayor. My name is Philip Peterson. I live at 5519 West 70th Street. I have been part of the study group, and my concern is this. The Edina Housing Foundation, first of all, purchased that Waldorf Nevins property. You are concerned, Mayor Brindle, or Council Brindle, that there was going to be an increased cost of $500,000 or whatever to abate the property. I'm curious as to how or why the foundation made that purchase. They spent $1 million to buy the land and not look after that issue up front. So that's a judgment issue on the part of the foundation. It seems to me that the foundation, having bought that property, sets the tone for subsequent purchases of other properties. There are only 4 property owners in that whole area that are affected by this. So if the Housing Foundation buys one, what is to keep them from purchasing a second or a third? And therefore, 75 units per acre is possible. In one case, if they buy one particular parcel of over 4 acres, that would be 300 additional low-income, potentially low-income housing parcels. So my concern is with that issue, and when the city is now looking at going after Southdale 2 monies that could be used for purchases of additional land, that could be done in this area as well. So I think overall, I think the problem is that we've been confronted with this particular set of circumstances with an incomplete policy for how affordable housing and the entire area needs to be developed. What we're talking about is a 13-acre canvas, if you will, of space to be developed. That's a unique experience for the city. And I need to say that I'm not opposed to affordable housing, but you need to be dealing with concentration, how many units ought to be in a particular area. You've got 80 going in on 76th Street, and there ought to be ways in which you can move some of these around rather than concentrating them in the 70th and Cahill area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. You favor the plan as your team put it together?
I'm sorry?
You favor the plan, as crafted by your team?
As originally presented.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor and City Council. My name is Steve Wright. I live at 5422 Creekview Lane. Pardon me, my voice is a little hoarse because I'm a trainer and a consultant. I hope you won't hold that against me. I live in the shadow of the units that are on the north side of 70th Street. If those units go up a floor, two things will happen. Number one, we will have no sun in our backyards for those private properties on the back of that line. Number two, you will lose truly affordable homes. I know many of the neighbors in those apartments. We work with each other and we exchange things back and forth. You name it, tools, advice, beer. So we have a relationship with that unit, both of those units, as a matter of fact, along with the two homes that are adjacent to that property that are both, I think, either Section 8 or definitely affordable. They're double family homes, I believe. My history is in developing affordable housing. In Los Angeles, I worked for the county and for the city, and I also worked for Habitat out there for many years. So I have frontline personal experience with the lives and the impacts that affordability has on people's lives. I support it, absolutely. It's absolutely necessary. And I believe it's appropriate for this part of the community, for this area. So that isn't an issue for me, not at all. What is an issue for me is the density of concerns that I'm hearing over the history of this project that have not yet been properly addressed, in my judgment, to the extent that I don't think anybody really has a handle on what's to come and doesn't really have an umbrella over what this project really is and how to control it, how to manage it, and how to gain the objectives that it truly intends to achieve, which I think need to be achieved. I also was involved in Newtown development in Washington, D.C. and Maryland. So I think that the mixed use, so-called, objectives are wonderful. Having commercial on a first floor and having residential above, absolutely wonderful, because then people who work there can live there. I think there are issues, well, I won't need to re-enumerate them. You've heard them this evening. So fundamentally, my recommendation is to send this back to the small group development people, address this list of issues that have been raised tonight and over the recent past of these hearings, so that we have truly something that does deliver what not only my neighborhood wants to deliver, but the community of Edina at large wants to accomplish, and not allow this to become some sort of a developer's boondoggle. That's not at all what I want to have happen up there, and I see a potential for that.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
And I want to skip.
Yes, thank you.
Paperwork.
My name is Frank Lorenz, 7151 York Avenue South. This is a general comment, although it's triggered by the fact that during the previous testimony, the terms workforce housing and affordable housing seem to come up over and over again, and they seem to be used interchangeably. What I suggest to you is you really need to get the metrics of how you evaluate these projects up to date and correct, and they certainly aren't right now. You're using the the county of Hennepin's median household income, which is $91,000 a year for your calculations, even though you must know that the median household income in Edina is much higher than that. It's probably about $125,000. But nonetheless, you're using $91,000 as the median income for Edina. And then you apply a factor of 60% of that to get to what you're calling the workforce housing. So that means that a household, which is normally 2 adults, would have an income of $54,000. If 2 young people that work for the city or work in the city, firemen, policemen, nurses, teachers, if you want to provide housing for those people, if you make the outrageous assumption that they might be able to find a roommate and live with a roommate, which is what they've done for the past 4 or 5 years when they were in college, then these workforce people have a combined household income of $110,000, or for a teacher just right out of college, 46,000 times 2 is 92,000. You know, compared to the rest of the state and the rest of Hennepin County, these people aren't poor. You know, you're making your developers do back handsprings and strangle themselves to put a few affordable housing units in every project when you don't really need affordable housing. You know, the technology of in-wall units, which used to be called Murphy beds, you know, the mayor and I are old enough to know that term. You know, they have beautiful units that fold down out of a credenza in the wall. You can have a private bedroom for each of the 2 adults. You know, you need to get your metrics right, because you're going through all of these gymnastics and renegotiating. Oh, add another story, take out another story, more trees, less trees. You know, you're not providing housing for the poor. You're providing what you call workforce housing. You know, the
Mr.
real
Lorenz,
poor.
I need to let you drift over there.
Yeah,
Thanks. Got your point, I think. Thank you. Anyone else that wants to address the council? Give us your thoughts.
I'll keep it short and sweet. Phil Miller, 7219 Lanham Lane. I've gone to a few of the hearings. I would just emphasize and encourage the council to enforce the existing workforce housing, and perhaps consider changing the allowance of developers buying out of that, and in fact distributing the housing. It was shocking to me, actually, to find out that a developer can obviate the need to put in workforce housing in a new development by simply buying their way out of it. And it's not entirely clear where that, I'm sure that money gets plowed back into these developments, but concentrating it in an area where the work group is already proposing among the most dense housing already, to then propose an amendment that's going to take it 50% above that, strikes me as unreasonable. And I would separate, I think people get emotional and commingle the workforce housing from just the sheer density we're talking about in the area. And I think it was a very thoughtful discussion, a number of neighborhood meetings around the implication of that density. When you hear some of the numbers talked about, potentially nearly 1,000 units going into a very tight area that's already dense, that already has bad traffic flow, rather, strikes me as problematic. Affordable housing or not, for me,
isn't really relevant. I think Edina needs to support Met Council recommendations for affordable housing. It should be distributed. I don't understand how it's gotten commingled with needing to have essentially the tail wag the dog, and we're going to change the requirement for a whole neighborhood plan, area plan, to accommodate someone who's already bought land and is basically trying to backdoor a larger development of whatever type. I'd feel the same way if it was high-end luxury housing. That many units on a tight space there is going to be a problem, and it sets a precedent for the whole neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Ryan Brysock. We live at 7216 Fleetwood Drive.
Ryan, what was your last name again?
Brysock, B-R-E-I-S-A-C-H. The council members received an email from me and my wife this weekend, so I'll emphasize a couple of things to build on some of the comments just quickly this evening. Stephen's comments a minute ago really resonated with me in terms of process. So we're relatively new residents to the city, and we moved in and shortly found out after moving in that the small area plan process was starting. We have a school-age daughter and a preschool-age daughter, and thought this was a great opportunity to involve them early in civic engagement. It's been an interesting process over the past 12 months or so as we attended the community input sessions, and then got really excited about the potential that the small area plan outlines for this really underutilized asset that's just a 10-minute walk from many of our homes. What I want to emphasize this evening is process. I think the process or lack thereof, especially at the kind of climax of this process, has been I think frustrating for a lot of the residents. I mean, there was a really well-established cadence and a lot of transparency in terms of what the process was for engagement, and for the working group to come up with a small area plan based upon the community input. It feels like there's been kind of a rush to the finish line without a lot of a planned or defined process, and even in some cases roles and responsibilities between the Planning Commission, staff in some cases, and it's been a little bit frustrating to watch what was a really exciting vision that had been articulated kind of hit the rocks as it nears completion here. So this evening I think clear communication with the community in terms of next steps is really important, and this is I think it's a matter of trust, and I think what you're hearing a lot from the community members is a fair amount of emotion, and I think there are a number of missed opportunities throughout this process, especially as the Planning Commission asked for some of the staff amendments to be made to really clarify the intent. And I started off opposed to the staff amendments, and I think after some further consideration, I understand the intent in terms of not allowing developers by right to build to the limits. Where I'm left this evening, and what I would ask the council to consider, again, is a process-oriented matter. The planning commissioners emphasized in the meeting in December that planning should not be, or zoning should not be project-specific, and I would ask this evening that as you consider Resolution 2019-10, that you remove the density flexibility from the comprehensive plan amendments that were proposed. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Mr. Brysock. Anyone else wish to come forward and address the council?
Good evening. Alice Hulbert, 7221 Terra Road. I was a member of the planning group. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of the background of what we went through in coming up with this plan. When we came in, we were given the direction that do not bring your opinions to this meeting. We want you to talk to your neighbors. We want you to network throughout your community and come back and tell us what people want to see in changes for this little node. We made up posters and went around putting them up in coffee shops and nagged our neighbors to come to these meetings, to talk to them and get a point of view of what they wanted to see in the future. And I think our plan reflects that very well. I think Mayor Hovland, you were at one of our meetings. I believe you were there, Councilmember Brindle. I think when we brought our final plan out, a lot of people were very shocked at the height that we were proposing. But during our meetings, we were told over and over again, if you want to have a commercial node, you have to have more roofs. You cannot have, this commercial node is going to be snuffed out unless you bring more roofs here to support the business. So that's where we came up with our height ideas. We were not given any information about mitigation of polluted sites. We had no idea about any kind of affordable projects coming forward. We were purely bringing forward the views of the community, and those were the directions that we were given. So I think we stretched quite a long way to accommodate the developers who were on our committee who wanted more density. So we moved from 6 units to 50, which was a pretty big jump. And I think we've done the best we could with the information that we were given. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And you favor the plan as...
I favor the plan as it's written, yes. I think to change, I think the development of this project, which is still really in the rumor phase, since there's nothing specific in writing, deserves its own hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ms. Hulbert. Anyone else? Okay. I think we'll close the public hearing. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Discussion. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye. 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 Opposed? Carried. I think, Director Teague, I'm going to go all the way back to Dr. Schneider, was concerned that these edits are something that came from the staff. I mean, I guess in the context of you having drafted them, they came from you, but they actually came from a direction from some other entity, and you might want to explain that again, how you happened to create these edits.
That's correct. It came from the direction of the Planning Commission at the work session that they held to discuss the draft plan. So they had asked me to draft some language that would allow some flexibility to allow greater density, specifically for affordable housing projects. And then they had the concern in regard to just allowing the height increase by right. And so they asked staff to draft some language for them to consider when it came to them as part of the public hearing, for them to consider as an addendum to the report.
Good. I'm going to jump around a little bit. The gentleman that lives in Coventry was concerned that based on his calculations that we might end up with 280 kids at a density level of 50 units per acre. Manager Neal, I think you've had some you have some input on this issue because we've looked at this in conjunction with the school district about multifamily units and the number of children produced per multifamily unit based on prevailing statistical data and how it correlates with what's actually happened in our community to date.
That's yes, Your Honor, that's correct. In fact, at this moment, we are engaged with the Edina School District in a joint study to look at this very issue of student population and development of a predictive model based on the work of Hazel Reinhardt, former state demographer. And she has produced predictive models in the past that we have used, and she's actually refining that data, refining her data now and sharpening her model for us. And we're going to see what that model tells us in a joint session with the school board, I think sometime in February. We're still picking a date. But what that model has shown us in the past is it would predict 0.1 students per unit in an apartment complex setting. We have tested that model against a particular development in Edina with the Edina School District on the 71 France development, and it produced exactly 0.1 students per unit. So we think that based on her work and her level of expertise, both statewide and even locally here in Edina, that's a pretty good metric to use, and it's a pretty good model to use. And we're going to have more details about how that model works here in town and how we might use it in future development proposals as well.
Good. Commissioner Lee, maybe this is one for you. One of our fellow residents that testified, Mr. Wright, thought that the SAP ought to go back to get some further questions answered. I take it by virtue of the fact that you've presented this to the Planning Commission and presented it to the Council, you feel like this is in a posture where it's ready for some decision making to be done by the Council. And if I'm putting you on the spot unnecessarily, don't tell me, and I'll ask somebody else.
I appreciate asking the question, because I was considering that when I heard the comment. That's certainly a right of the City Council. That's always part of the process. You could send it back and ask the work group to reconvene. In some respects, I feel that the work group has accomplished its work. There will probably always be something else on the horizon that needs consideration. But if the City Council would deem that that is something that they feel strongly about, we could reconvene the work group to discuss whatever it is that, however you want to frame that.
Okay. Well, I've got you up here. I think one of the last speakers was Mr. Miller, and he was concerned about the implications of density, and maybe you just want to revisit again the effort that you went through with residents that were on the team and your consultants and the Planning Commission in determining how you came up with that 50 dwelling units per acre. And then also his other comment was he was concerned about there could be 1,000 housing units in this area, and I'm sure that's something you looked at too in the context of looking at density and height. So
yes,
maybe comment on that too.
Sure. For one thing, density only applies when residential units are involved. So there are many properties that are zoned there for commercial only or industrial. That won't change unless, of course, they come before the City Council and ask for a zoning variance. So to say that you take the maximum density and that's going to occur on all 13 or 15 acres of the study area is just unrealistic. I understand the need to kind of look at that, but it would never happen because it absolutely would never turn to 100% residential, for one. It is a commercial node, and that is the definition of it. And because of that, our zoning also states that there are commercially zoned properties. Unless the council changes that to all housing, which I don't think that that would be the goal, if we want to keep it a node, that would never happen. So as far as the densities, I think it was the accurate conclusion of the work group based on, as I said, the projects we have had already occur in Edina and surrounding areas, and looking at the form, the height, the acres that actually were involved on individual parcels to come up with that range. It is a substantial range, so you will get a variety. And we did never, I would have to say no one ever foresaw that or planned that there would be full 100% 50 units per 50 dwelling units on every single parcel.
All right. And to the point you just made about part of the property is zone commercial at the present time, I take it that the work that your team did, you looked at some of these issues about how to make sure that we have a mix of uses over there and how to maximize the chances that those mix of uses will continue in the future. Maybe you want to comment on that as well, about how you saw what you did being reflective of that notion.
Absolutely. I think that if this is any indication, we had a hard time getting off of simply focusing on the plaza, which I'll say is the commercial strip. That is only one portion. I want to say maybe 7 acres, or at most 6 acres of the entire node, and yet I think we got bogged down looking at that. So it clearly, in everyone's mind, that is the centerpiece. And as I said, the zoning on those properties are not changing. If anything, there may be this sense that we'd like to see a little more. Some of the industrial zoned properties, in fact, do function as somewhat commercial retail. Some of them have the karate studio or dance studio. So in some aspects, they already function that way. So the idea was to support that part of it. And if somehow by supporting that, it would be helped by the incorporation of additional housing units, then that would make it all the better. And that's where we had to start considering density. The minute you speak housing units, that's the magic word for the Met Council. Now you have to talk about where are those dwelling units going to be in your city so that we can plan for our infrastructure to support that. They don't ask us to identify any development that is commercial of nature, just simply dwelling units for population.
Mr. Mayor, while you're looking for your
Member
next
Fisher.
item, Carrie or Susan, do either of you know what is the full acreage of this study area? Because I'm hearing 13 acres, but does that include streets? Because we're not going to build housing on streets either.
Yeah, it should not include the streets.
It does not
I've been
include the
thumbing through
streets.
it to try to find a number. I'm not seeing a number in the plan, but I can run a calculation here.
But I think, Susan, I think you really explained
I
it pretty
did see a
well.
number.
You did?
Yeah, and I think there's like 3 plus acres north of 70th, and then balance, I don't remember where I saw it in the plan, but.
I think you explained pretty well the reality of that whole density thing. It's not, you couldn't possibly build out the whole thing at whatever density we would put as a maximum. It just wouldn't be a realistic conclusion, I guess.
One of the other concerns that was raised by Ms. Thorkelson was there, at least her assumption was, there was no real conversation at any point in time about the proposed edits, and shouldn't we have had a chance to have a conversation about those proposed edits that Director Teague was asked to make by the Planning Commission? And so could you comment on that?
Are you saying the proposed edits for tonight, those
Correct.
edits?
Correct.
Okay, the way that came about was at a work session. Our work group, the Planning Commission was inconclusive about whether there needed to be some language in the plan that would address greater height and density should a proposal come forward that was outside the range of the 10 to 50. We didn't arrive at any conclusion, and I recall that at that meeting we ran out of time, so I did request that Planner Teague at least draft up something that we could look at, because we were struggling. What would you see as something that we might include in there if there was to be this, how do we address greater than 50 dwelling units per acre? And so we received that language, and I want to say that it came right before that meeting where we were to discuss the public hearing, and so it was a very short time frame. I did have a little window to weigh in as the co-chair, and at that time I made it clear, and I think our Planning Commission also received that communique that it was not in support of it, and that if this was a reflection of the affordable housing policy, that it really is important enough that it should be covered in the greater comp plan and not affect the document at this point in time for the 70th and Cahill plan.
Okay, good. And Director Teague, your recollection is consistent with Commissioner Lee's?
It is, yes.
Yeah, it came up in mid-November, as I recall.
Correct.
And then you crafted some language pursuant to the Planning Commission's requests. And then by the time the Planning Commission had its public hearing, people had an opportunity to see that language. I know a lot of the correspondence we were getting, I think during that period of time, indicated that people had seen that language, and at least in the neighborhood, didn't really favor those edits. So there was at least one opportunity for people to speak to the proposed edits at the Planning Commission public hearing.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes, they would have had a limited time to see it. It would have been strictly from the packet material. That would be their way of seeing it. So if they checked in and looked at the packet materials, that's how they would see it first.
Okay. All right.
And to add to that, it was also presented, as part of the public hearing, similar to how it was this evening. So it was brought up before the public hearing was open.
So there wouldn't have been a lot of advance notice and opportunity to study it, but
no.
Folks, this is not an audience participation portion of the matter.
Look at the tape. Watch it back on TV.
Mr. Wright, please.
The wrong person. He's right. No, you're right.
All right. No pun intended on that, all right. Okay, so did other council members have any other questions that popped up in their minds from listening to some of the testimony? Member Brindle, did you have anything else? Member Anderson?
Well, just a clarification on some of my comments. They were without regard to whether the Waldorf-Nevins property was still sitting there bankrupt or whether it had been sold. It's just in my experience of watching development happen at various parcels. That's what I anticipate would happen here. That was the nature of my comment.
Okay, good. Well, let's move on to council conversation here. And I don't know who would care to lead off. Member Staunton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's 20 to 10, and done a lot of listening, done a lot of reading. Thanks everybody for being here and sharing your thoughts and sharing them in writing as well. I want to start by thanking the members of the working group. Commissioner Lee, I stood in the same place that you were standing 7, 8, 9 years ago with the Grandview small area planning process, and so I've experienced this this effort to try to distill what a whole bunch of people are hoping and dreaming for an area into something that can provide common guidance moving forward, and it's a really challenging effort. And I want to applaud all of you who worked on it. Many of you were generous enough to spend some time on the phone with me in the last week or two, and I thank you for that time in helping me to understand the process that you went through. And it's very difficult for us sitting here at the very tail end of the process to have an appreciation for the hours and hours and hours that went into this. There were 12 or 13 meetings plus the 3 community engagement sessions. It seems like the neighbors really waded in. You had a real robust participation, and so I thank the residents who participated in that process, as well as the residents and resident planning commissioners and former council members who participated on the small area planning work group. One of the things that has occurred to me as I've watched this unfold is that we've had a little bit of a muddling of this with issues that are getting overlapping. There's really 3 issues that I've heard talked about here. One is strategy and vision, and I think that's what we ought to be talking about tonight. But there's also been some discussion about tactics for implementation. I think that's a lot of what the Planning Commission was driving at in their potential edits or their proposed edits, was how do we make sure we're getting what we want? How do we implement that? They had one idea for that. The working group has another idea for that. And then the third issue that keeps getting tangled up in this is affordable housing. Because this project, which, by the way, I haven't seen yet for the Waldorf-Nevins site, is coming forward, there's some concern about how do we deal with affordable housing. I think it's important for us to remember that tonight is about the strategy and vision. It's about what direction do we want to go. It's not a blueprint. I think you may, Commissioner Lee, have even referred to it as a green print. It's a direction, a vision, an effort to distill what our community wants going forward for this area. It is not about the affordable housing. It's not about our efforts to implement this, although it's important to be aware of those things. And those are both important issues, but I think they're going to have their night as well. We have an affordable housing policy. Commissioner Lee, you referred to it, and we have been trying to make a lot of efforts to move forward on affordable housing in our community, and I'm heartened by many people who came forward to talk about the importance of affordable housing in our community, and I think we need to have a discussion about how we proceed on affordable housing. One of the chapters of our comprehensive plan is going to be a housing chapter, and that will include affordable housing as well as other housing. And I have talked a lot about the need for us to think about affordable housing on a broad continuum and to think about housing in a broad variety of types of housing. And those are important issues, and those are important issues for us to engage the community on, and we will do that, but tonight is not the night for that. Similarly, I don't think tonight is the night to figure out exactly how we implement this plan. It's really interesting to me that we've had a variety of these small area plans, which, by the way, have all been very heavy on community engagement. They've been resident-led and consultant-supported, not the other way around. But each one has come up with a little different way of doing things. The 44th and France Small Area Plan came up with, as you described, Commissioner Lee, a kind of give and take approach to it. The Southdale Working Group came up with and are continuing to work on something called Design Experience Guidelines, which are really similar to this form-based code that you're talking about. And this small area plan has come up with a different approach to it. And I think it's fine to have all those different approaches, and we will have a time, and it will be an important time, to talk about the tools we use to make sure we're getting what we want, the hopes and dreams that we have in this plan tonight. So with respect to this plan, one of the things that I think needs to be said, because it's human nature to focus on maybe the things that we disagree on first. I'm astounded at the level of agreement that you were able to come to, because from my conversations with folks, it sounds like people came from a variety of different perspectives on this working group. And yet we're able to reach a consensus, perhaps a grudging consensus, but a consensus about what the way forward was. And I think that's hugely, hugely valuable. I want to put this in a little broader context. I mentioned some of the other small area plans we're working on. We're in the middle of kind of finishing up our comprehensive plan for 2018. And we took a different approach in 2018 than we did in 2008. We really have said the vast majority of the community we want to stay the same. This low-density, single-family neighborhoods organized around great schools and great parks. That's what we want. That's the foundation of the community. But we recognize that we have a few of these nodes, like 70th and Cahill, 44th in France, Grandview, 50th in France, and a larger scale, Southdale and Pentagon Park, that are tired and want to turn over. And in fact, in our 2008 comprehensive plan, we identified those. We called them areas of potential change, and in fact, that is where the redevelopment pressure has come from. So our focus this year has been on these plans, and so it's a really important thing to do, but it's important to recognize that this is one of many small nodes that we're working on and envisioning the future for. And then there's two other things that I just want to set as a backdrop for us. We have talked as a council about our strategic objectives in this community, and really there's three of them. One is doing the blocking and tackling of local government. It's the snow plowing, public safety, it's taking care of our parks and all that. But the other two that really are at issue here is, one is planning for connected and sustainable future development, and that's those nodes that we're talking about tonight. And the other is fostering an engaged and inclusive community. And that's a really important part of tonight too. Somebody talked in the public comments about trust. And I think part of trust is having community engagement and figuring out a way to distill thousands of different voices into a direction for our community when we know change is coming, and we want to have something that we can all be proud of and that will continue to make this great community an even better community. And so when I'm thinking about this plan, I'm thinking about those two strategic objectives. I'm thinking about community engagement and how we can support that and build on the trust that's been developed. And I'm also thinking about how can we plan for connected and sustainable future development. And I think the community engagement piece is hugely important. And so I am supportive of the plan as written. I don't think it's perfect, but I don't think anything ever is perfect. I think it's a first step on the road to in creating a vision of what our future is going to be like in this area. I think it is the subject of lots of approaches from different people, and I'm really pleased to see the consensus that's been built out of that. And I have no illusions that this is the end of the road. I think this is the beginning of more work to be done in figuring out how do we craft what we want in this particular area as these developments come forward. There are so many parts of the plan that I'm pleased with in terms of the vision of a village node, of connections to and within, of adding a variety of housing and other options to our community. But I think overall what it does is it charts a course toward creating a new generation of the 70th and Cahill node that will be good for the community as a whole, but also good for the neighboring residential communities and provides a transition into those. So, Mr. Mayor, I am going to support us approving the plan as written and then working to work on implementation as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Fisher?
So a lot of what Councilmember Staunton just said, I agree wholeheartedly with, so I won't repeat some of it. But I want to step back, and again, I want to thank the entire small area working group and all of the folks that participated in this. But just, I think the point is well taken. This is a guidance document. It's a vision for the future. It's not literally a blueprint for how things are going to get built. I can assure you things won't get built the way they might have been diagrammed on page whatever. But the important elements of this plan, and some of them we haven't even talked about tonight, some really good pieces of this plan. And one of them I just want to speak to is this idea of encouraging the retention of existing businesses, or the supporting, in my mind, when I read this plan, and it's been something I've been concerned about in this area for some time, is the magic. One of the bits of magic of this small area is that startup businesses, little family-run businesses, maybe even immigrant businesses, all of these opportunities exist here that don't exist in most of our community. And I think in many ways we can all enjoy that opportunity to go and frequent those businesses. And I think that's going to be a tricky part of this, right? How do you have this redevelopment happen and still retain that kind of magic? And I think it's just as we talk about affordable housing or workforce housing or however we want to talk about that, there's a similar thing happening here with sort of this type of business. And it's going to take intention to keep that or to maintain it or to foster it. And I think it's worth doing, and it's worth trying to do in this node. So I actually appreciate the way the plan talks about it. But again, the plan didn't tell us how to solve it, right? Just like it can't possibly tell us how to solve the affordable housing or how to solve the, ultimate density or anything. It's setting the guidance. And I think it does a good job of that. Let's see if I can get my notes here. I think one way to enhance this business district is to make sure people can get to it to help support it. And I think the plan does hit on all of what I saw as 4 key things. Making better access from the surrounding neighbors, right? We all have to be able to get here easily and not necessarily have to drive there. Bringing some housing into this node is going to be very important for those businesses to succeed in the long run. So then how we bring that housing in and the type of housing is going to be important so it fosters the next housing or the next business or the next whatever. And then the enhanced regional trail connections. We haven't talked a lot about that tonight, but I thought it was really great what you all have worked on in terms of making sure that regional trail enhances, the access to these businesses, and future residential is important, but also if there's another piece of the trail that it connects in the right way to enhance these businesses. And then another really big deal, I think, is this connection, creating a connection to that industrial park. So those thousands of employees that are very close but seemingly miles away can get here. So I think that's all a piece of this, and we haven't spent much time on it tonight. Those are all really good things, and I just wanted to make sure that it's out there. I think the other thing I heard tonight, which I was really pleased about, during the public hearing, a number of you got up and talked about your friend or your neighbor who served on that committee, and you were aware of the hard work they were doing because they were sharing it with you. That's a real sign of success in terms, and I know the process wasn't easy and there were a lot of differing opinions, but it tells me that people were working on a committee and going back and talking to their neighbors, and that's really a good thing. That's the way you want this process to work. So I thought that was great. Just throwing some random ideas out here. The other thing I do want to say is, Councilmember Anderson, I agree with you that one thing we have to be very careful of is that we do have some naturally occurring affordable housing within the boundaries of this district. And if we're not careful, we could actually be trying to create affordable housing over here while it's being wiped out here for a building that's another story or 2 higher. And we can't allow that to happen. And that's actually back to the point earlier, the nuance of this amendment. I'm leaning toward no amendment, just approve the plan the way it sits. If I could parse it out, and I suppose we could, I'm more favorable to the height limitation. In other words, we're not changing the maximum height, but we're creating a more obvious lever to make sure we don't just, without say, have someone come in and just boom, they're going to take out a project. We need to keep the height lower so they can't do that unless it's a project in the spot, in the location with all the right things to allow it. I also think, though, there's other ways to do it rather than coming in and amending this plan, right? I mean, and we've talked earlier today, I just feel there are other tools that we have. Commissioner Lee talked about that. Through our zoning tools, we can create that lever. And I think we have to have it. That's how we're going to avoid the unintended consequence of having some ability to have a 5-story building. We don't want to take out the affordable housing we have. So with all that said, I agree with Councilmember Staunton. I think we should celebrate the fact that this wasn't an easy process. A lot of people maybe uncomfortably came to some conclusions. It is not what I probably would have picked for the density. I think I would have gone a little bit, I probably would have gone 60, but who cares what I think? You all figured that out. I think, personally, when I read the plan, the thing I see with the density where it's at is that I don't see an LRT station. That density may not work, a station may not happen with that level of density, but I think that's so far out there, I'm not particularly concerned about that right now. I think that sort of evolves over a long period of time. And what that means is that if you're going to have a station of some sort someday, if that were ever to happen, and by the way, I'm glad that you at least put a spot for it, right? Just because something's not possible today doesn't mean we should ignore the possibility down the road. So I'm glad you did that. But I think the reality is you'd need some sort of parking to go with it, which, we'd have to figure that out with that someday. So with that, all of that rambling, I think overall this is a good plan. And And like the comment was made, it may not be perfect. None of these plans are perfect. They're just a stepping point along, hopefully in the right direction. And I think a lot of people put a lot of work into it. I think we should approve it as is.
Thank you, Member Fisher. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with members Fisher and Staunton. I'm so impressed, and really I find the plan as written to be so compelling that it seems to me to be a wonderful opportunity to create an exercise, not necessarily in form-based coding because we're not there, but to have a clear plan and an idea of what can be achieved in node development, I think is spectacular. And I also was very sensitive, Commissioner Lee, to your comment about the fact that had you been present during the vote at the Planning Commission, that it would have been 5-4, and so not necessarily viewed as a fail. In listening to the public testimony, I come to the conclusion that density has been the concern expressed most often, and yet at the same time, in reviewing the plan, I see that affordable housing is referenced often, and it is very supportive of affordable housing in whatever format the opportunities for development present. So I'm not concerned about shutting out affordable housing. I haven't really heard, certainly at the neighborhood meeting that Member Brindle and I attended, I heard nothing but support for affordable housing as a topic, but it has been the implementation here that I think, with regard to density and trying to find a formula, which is not necessarily the case, that I think has kind of led us astray there. The city obviously has great latitude to create exception if necessary, to go higher at some point beyond the plan, and certainly there have been opportunities in the past to do so. They've been exercised, and that opportunity will present itself as well in the future. I have a concern about the north side boundary, because I would be very, very supportive of the plan as written, with the potential exception of pulling that line back to the south side of 70th, to be certain that there won't be, that the existing affordable housing is preserved. And it just really won't, other than at code, with a future proposal, could change. That could be redeveloped. But right now, it really presents a significant opportunity for families of lesser income to have a good living condition. So I'm in support of that plan, but I would like to see some change in the north side boundary line.
Okay, we can talk about that. Member Brindle.
Thank you. As with all small area plans, this one is a vision of what may occur in this area over time. And one thing mentioned by Member Fisher is connections. And one important connection that I think that this plan respects and brings out is the connection to the rental apartments on the north side of 70th. I drive 70th a lot. I live in the southwest corner of Edina, not far from this. And I see 70th as a divider between the apartments and the area at 70th. So to have the vision of that connection, I think is brilliant. It will make quality of life for the residents of those apartments just to know that that they're noticed, they're respected, and they're wanted as part of this area. You go to the north and you are in that neighborhood. And every time I drive by there, there's the string of single-family homes and the apartment buildings. And I go, I hope that's a neighborhood. You know, I hope it is. I hope there's some continuity there. And because it's just strung along 70th Street. But to have that connection, I think is is an important part of this vision. Looking at the edits that the Planning Commission requested, and I understand why they requested them, because they would like to see flexibility when looking at achieving goals, whether they be in public realm or sustainability or affordable housing or open space. Those are all levers that you work with a developer to say, and come up with a project that not only delivers what that project delivers, but it also enhances the area around that project and improves the overall area. So those levers really are important. And they are, I think they can be included in the broader zoning ordinances and the broader comprehensive plan without having to be in this small area plan, because they actually apply. As I mentioned earlier, they apply to every development that happens here. They apply to all the other small area plans. So I don't see why we would put them in this plan. So I would be in favor of this plan as written, knowing that there's hard work ahead of us to modify the zoning code, to incorporate what is in these edits, and as well as the comprehensive plan, and then to look at the way ahead with implementation. But I am heartened to hear that that there is understanding that when that first project goes, other projects, this area will become noticed if it isn't noticed by this progress already, and that that stuff will begin to happen. But it will be with a lot of effort to make it right, make it balance, and to achieve the visions that have been set down here.
Thank you. I too want to thank everybody that is in the audience, people that left, people in the neighborhood that didn't think of coming tonight, for participating in some of these meetings that we had to get this great public input. Also the team itself. But Commissioner Lee, I especially want to single you out tonight for not only helping lead the team with your colleague, Jerry, but tonight, what a great representative of the city of Edina you were as a resident, as a planning commissioner, as someone who cared about this particular area and stepped up to the plate, along with Jerry, to help lead this team in working on this effort. So, really, my personal thanks to both of you. So, some of the meetings I went to, you ended up in these great conversations, and you can see a little bit of the tension, I think, in that 4-4 vote, or the conundrum of it, because the conversations I had with residents, and I used to live real close to 70th and Cahill, and not too far now, was the idea that we had all these great little businesses there. Someone mentioned business from immigrants like Cahill Bistro, 3 immigrant brothers from Ecuador, I believe, and you don't want to see them be priced out of the neighborhood. And so you're in this dilemma where you want something to happen there, because 70th and Cahill, as you noted in the executive summary, is an area that's positioned for change and needs to change. But you're worried that in the process of doing that, you're going to lose some of these small business people that are just getting kind of going in life. So that's one of the things I see that we're going to wrestle with on an implementation basis, is to as we position for change and go through some change, that we are sensitive to some of the businesses that are there, and try to figure out ways to not necessarily have government assist them, but to figure out how to make it possible for them to stay there if at all possible. Sometimes we get in these conversations, and I'm harkening back to all the positive sort of input that folks gave on this particular project, that sometimes change can be a 6-letter word that sounds like a 4-letter word. But my experience is that with this particular project, it wasn't ever a situation where people didn't recognize there was a need for change, but embrace the idea of that change. And as this went through the process, I think everybody was really positive about what could happen at 70th and Cahill. So I am as well. And I think Member Staunton did a great job of looking back in time. And this is something we should all be grateful for, that for those of us that live in Edina, that in 2008, we looked at these potential areas of change, areas that were getting a little bit tired and worn out. 44th in France, Valley View, Wooddale, 70th and Cahill, the Southdale District. And we've had people interested both in our community and outside our community, interested in coming into these areas and coming in after we've done small area plans and doing projects that are consistent with these small area plans. So I'm pleased that we're getting to the sort of the end of this particular part of the process and adopting this plan. So my thoughts are the same as everybody else's up here. Consistent with everybody else, I think we should adopt the plan as recommended by the team without the, they call them the edits or the conditions attached to the base resolution. And as Member Staunton says, we'll deal with these other issues when they come up and in front of us, because nobody up here has seen anything about any plan related to affordable housing. We've heard some conversations, we've heard some rumors, maybe had some conversations that were secondhand, but that's where we are. So I would also embrace this notion of adopting the plan as is. I want to address this issue that Member Anderson raised, and I want to turn to Director Teague. So to this concern about contracting the small area plan study area to be just that area south of 70th, I think Commissioner Lee addressed this issue, but you might comment on, from a zoning standpoint, can there ever be anything there, and I think I might have raised this issue, other than moderate density multifamily housing without us changing the code?
That is correct, yeah. It's in the small area plan suggests that the land use designation is medium density residential. So it's not part of that neighborhood node and the 50 units an acre. That said, you certainly still could shift that boundary down. So it's runs even with 70th Street. It doesn't change the land use that's suggested. That would be covered in the land use chapter in terms of the median density residential. It'd be somewhat similar to, you recall with the 44th and France plan, you expanded the boundary by one lot. This one, you'd just be making it a little shorter, so it runs along 70th Street. So that's up to the council.
So we could update the land use category from 70th on south, from NC to NN, neighborhood commercial neighborhood node.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to change any of the land use designations. It's just simply shifting that line down to 70th Street.
Yeah, because the land use on page 37 of the proposed plan, the land use north of 70th, even though it's within the study area, is designated as medium density residential. Right. I'm sympathetic to the concern and to the goal, but it strikes me that it's part of a larger conversation about preservation of affordable housing that we should be having as part of our whole affordable housing and housing policy. So I guess I'm not sure it makes a difference whether we bring the study line down or not. I think ultimately we're going to have to talk about exactly the issue Councilmember Anderson is raising about how do we most effectively preserve or create incentives to preserve existing naturally occurring affordable housing.
If I might add too, if this helps, the building height limits map talks about 3 stories not to exceed 39 feet on that area. The height overlay district today allows 3 stories and 36 feet, so it's not a big increase that's suggested here.
Well, I'm completely, as I said earlier, I'm in agreement that we have to just be careful what we're doing there. What I'm understanding is it won't make a bit of difference pulling the line down or not pulling the line down. And I think by changing the line now suggests that it wasn't part of the study, and in fact it was. And the fact that it was, and where we sit today, is that we're not proposing a change on that side. is almost more important than pretending that it wasn't in the study, where it just sort of leaves it ambiguous. I think we might have better tools to do what we're trying to do by just leaving the boundaries where they are and acknowledging it and trying to make sure that we're doing the right things moving forward. If I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, that was the direction I was kind of heading to, is that I don't think it matters either. And I think it's a conversation to be had in the future, and certainly understanding of your observations on that naturally occurring affordable housing across the street. You know, and that is a conversation or is a thought process a lot of folks are going through right now that are interested in this topic. So, well, we've got Resolution 2019-10 in front of us. Member Staunton, do you want to move the matter without those edits attached at the end, without Section 2, I guess it is?
So moved.
There a second? Motion by Member Staunton, second by Member Anderson, that we adopt Resolution 2019-10, basically embracing the plan as recommended by the study team, with the exclusion of the edits at the end, which are embodied in Section 2. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, good. Thanks, folks, for coming this evening. All right, we are moving on to the reports and recommendations section of the agenda, and the next matter before us is the appointment of what we may call the mayor pro tem or the acting mayor, and that is to appoint the acting mayor for 2019. And Manager Neal, you have this matter.
This is another standing appointment that the council makes every year at this very first meeting, and it's by a majority vote of the council. So from among you, one of you needs to be designated as the acting mayor.
All right, so historically what we've done, and Member Brindle has been the mayor, acting mayor, mayor pro tem, for the past 4 years. We've traditionally appointed the person with the most seniority. She continues to be the most senior person behind the mayor. And if someone would entertain the continuation of that sort of process for us into the future here, foreseeable future, I would entertain a motion to appoint Member Brindle as the acting mayor.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion?
So none of you got my campaign material, apparently. Okay.
You get caught in my filter.
Assuming she's willing.
Yeah, we should.
As long as you're still here, I'll do it.
All right, we got a motion, a second, a little jab here and there. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And then we are moving on to Resolution 2019-11, which accepts various grants and donations. It is required by state law that we adopt a resolution when someone wants to donate something to the city. And if folks have had a chance to review that, I'll entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2019-11, accepting donations on behalf of the city of Edina.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and second to adopt Resolution 2019-11. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And donations in this reporting period, Edina Crime Fund, just as generous as could be. 50th and France Foot Patrol, December 2018, almost $2,000 there. The Canine Retirement Program, almost $2,000 there. The bike patrol program, $14,000, and the canine program, $9,500. So, Member Staunton, Member Brindle, please convey our appreciation to the crime fund.
Will do.
And then there's general police department usage, a family foundation, the Hendry Family Foundation, a $2,000 gift there. NC Little Hospice, $1,500. The Smiths, general fire department usage, some other generous gifts there from NC Little Hospice, Quigley family, bench at Pamela Park by the Lakey family, $3,200 donation and for one of their family members, and then several donations to the Braemar Golf Course Memorial Fund from many of the folks in our community that love Braemar and love golf. So those names will all be posted to the city website and can be viewed there, and we thank everybody and every organization for their generosity. All right, let's move on.
So I would like to note that Little Hospice on an annual basis makes these donations to Edina Fire and Edina Police.
Thank you for that notation. And then we've got a petition. We've got a petition requesting to keep a perpetual easement along the 4900 block of Maple Road. We should receive that petition and refer it to the community development folks for consideration. Is there a motion to receive that petition?
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to receive the petition requesting to keep a perpetual easement along the 4900 block of Maple Road. Any further discussion? All those in favor of receiving the petition and referring it on to the community development folks say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then we are on to correspondence. Anything new on the dais this evening?
No, sir, nothing more than what you had at the beginning of the night.
Aviation noise update. Member Brindle, anything to report post-holidays?
Couple things. Hearing a few complaints early morning flights, and residents are always welcome to email or call me. They're also welcome to attend the Noise Oversight Committee meetings. There is a community comment portion of the meeting, so that if a resident is experiencing something they have a question about, want more information about, or just want to let the Noise Oversight Committee of the Metropolitan Airports Commission know about what they're observing, that is what that community comment is for. Noise Oversight Committee meets the third Wednesday in the odd number of months. So this month we meet January 16th. And there is a report on the agenda this month to get a report on the fleet mix and nighttime operations at MSP. So that will fall right into those complaints that we're hearing. So that's what I have for aviation.
Good. Manager Neal, anything on aviation?
Yes, Your Honor, members of council, just a reminder that at National League of Cities, the noise group, aviation noise group, will again be holding its annual legislative briefing and training. We do know that they are going to host that event. We don't know whether it's going to be during the week or if it's going to be on Sunday. Typically, it's been on Sunday afternoon. We are in contact with the consultants who run that group, and we'll let you know as soon as we know.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. All right. Mayor and council comments. Member Fisher.
I don't have anything specific tonight other than just to welcome Councilmember Anderson. Look forward to working with you.
Member Staunton.
Well, I'm going to echo the same comments. Welcome aboard. It's good to have you, and we look forward to working together. The only other comment, I noticed in the correspondence, and I remember this coming across my email as well, a comment about internet, U.S. internet and CenturyLink and the like. Yes. And I remember early on in my first term we approved the CenturyLink franchise, and it just, the nature of the correspondence makes me think maybe we ought to at least get an update at some point about where we're at, how that went. I know there were some concerns about that CenturyLink franchise just kind of cream skimming the easy stuff, and I do think if we have more options, that's a good thing. And if there's opportunities to expand that, I don't have a predisposition on this, but it seems like a good time to revisit it again.
If you'd like, I can give you a quick update on it.
If you know off the top of your head, all the better.
I do. Regarding CenturyLink, you did grant in the cities within the Southwest Cable Commission, all granted franchise agreements to CenturyLink to provide cable television services during the same kind of terms and conditions that Comcast was meeting as well. And CenturyLink started their build out to be able to provide those services. As they were in the midst of their build out, they had a corporate change of heart about getting into the TV business, and so they began to put the brakes on their build out, and they stopped it. And they are gradually withdrawing from the residential wired TV market. So you're going to see them sort of slowly. They're not attracting. They're not marketing for more customers. They're going to service the customers who they already have, but they'll gradually pull back from them and withdraw from them altogether at some point in the future. That's what we've been told directly from the company. Concerning U.S. Internet, we do not. The Cable Commission itself does not regulate Internet services. Right? We only regulate cable television services. So, if U.S. Internet wanted to provide internet services in this city, as long as they complied with our other right-of-way management regulations mostly through Mr. Milner's office, they would be able to do that.
So it's just a right-of-way permit, and they can jump in with the rest of the utilities. Right. Okay. Thank you.
So sometimes there's this imagined barrier that people think we're creating for U.S. Internet to be in the city, and that's just not the case.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Member Brindle.
Welcome, Member Anderson. Thank you. And look forward to working with you. And a heartfelt thank you to Ann Cattray as she leaves her position with the city of Edina this week. I will actually miss her send-off on Thursday, which I'm sorry about. But Ann, I had lunch with her and kind of dug into this, and it looks like she started her career in Parks and Recreation with the city of Bloomington, and so she has a warm place in her heart for Bloomington. Bloomington has never had a park and rec department. So they run their park services out of community service. And so their goal with being the larger city that they are is to establish a park and recreation department. And who better to do it than Ann Cattray? And so it was a huge decision for her, as you well might imagine. And so filling her shoes will be a challenge, but I wish her all the best, and we're good friends as well, so maintain that relationship as well. So that's what I have.
What time is that event on Thursday?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock here?
At the golf course.
Pardon me?
Braemar Golf Course.
Braemar Golf Course, 4 o'clock Thursday.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you. Member Anderson, welcome, and look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's an honor to be here, and you only get to do things for the first time once. So thanks for the opportunity of doing that. I really wanted to thank Manager Neal for setting up 4 days of a series of orientation meetings for me. I know that isn't done routinely throughout the metro, but it's so useful to be in touch with people who are, for instance, having a chance to meet and talk to Director Milner and understand what's going on there. And same thing with our police chief and our fire chief and all the areas and departments all the way through to take a look at their budgets and say, gee whiz, how did that jump from there to there, and to have a clear understanding. And so I really thank you for that. And Casey, wherever she is, I know she's not here this evening, but she really was stuck right by me, made sure that everything was running on time, and that, you know, your 50 minutes are up, so let's move along here. She did a great job with that, so thank you, Casey. And again, thanks to all of you for your welcoming.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and we welcome you wholeheartedly and look forward to working with you. And enjoyed our conversation at noon today as well. It was nice to get to know each other better. My calendar, I guess we've been looking at a 2-week holiday stint here. Looking back to our last meeting, we had a tab meeting, I think the day after the last council meeting in mid-December, and we're still working on the regional solicitation. We are close, I think, to getting to the point where we'll be making some decisions, and I think those will come next week in terms of allocation of funds for the 2023-2024 period. In the region should be around $180 million being allocated based on the decisions of the tab. So that'll be it'll be an interesting meeting next week. Went to a West Metro Mayor's meeting with Congressperson-elect at the time, Dean Phillips, and that was the first time I think we've had a congressman from CD3 have a meeting with West Metro mayors, and there was a great turnout from all the little communities, including your mayor, yeah. And he had amazing things to say about you, and so I didn't try to disabuse him. I didn't. So that was, and that's something I think he's going to probably continue to do on a quarterly basis. So it's good to have that federal connection in a new way. A reminder that, again, Saturday is Walk with the Mayor at 9 o'clock. Meet at Starbucks at the Galleria. And it's just always a surprise. You never know who's going to be there. You haven't signed up, though, I noticed.
No.
All right. And then good to know, I'm glad you mentioned Director Catry. I was wondering about when they were going to have an event for it. I don't know why I missed that on my email, but try to be there Thursday. I think there was an Edina Community Foundation meeting starting at 3:30, so I'll have to
It's a drop-in, so it's more of an open house style.
Okay. All right. Good. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've got a couple of things.
Can I add one more thing before we jump to Manager Neal? And just the conversation about the National League of Cities visit made me think of this, that, you know, we have typically tried to visit our federal officials out there. And I think that since we have a couple months between now and then, it might not be a bad idea for us to have a discussion at a council meeting about the things that we want to advocate for out there, and then that'll, I think, give the public an ability to hear what we're intending to go visit with those folks about. And I know there's other cities in the metro and other League of Minnesota cities, which I'm on the board of, that, you know, we're also advocating. But I think it might be a good idea for us to have a little discussion about that before we go out there.
That is the plan.
Okay, great.
Yep. I've got a couple of things for you. One is it's city manager performance review time again.
Yes, it is.
I'm going to recommend to you this year that we use Craig Waldron. I don't know how many of you know Craig Waldron, Dr. Waldron. Longtime city manager in the metro, mostly in Oakdale. Is with Hamlin right now, but is a long association with League of Cities and Metro Cities, but does this kind of work on the side. Well, now it's not on the side anymore. It's part of his regular consulting business. Is this, it'd be the same kind of modified 360 style that we've used in the past. How does this sound to you? Is it okay?
Seems fine. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you want to, we should probably talk a little bit about process to see if, and Member Anderson won't know about process, and at least historic process, so we should talk about whether the council wants to use that same process we used last time.
Okay.
Which was, I think it was Member Brindle, and me.
Yeah, as the kind of the coordinators for the council.
Yep.
And I can fill Councilmember Anderson in on
And then we
past
have
practice.
we'd have a meeting with the consultant.
Yep.
And then offer up our opinions to him, and then
He's available,
as
and
part of his review.
His time frame fits our time frame in terms of kind of scheduling it into your work session schedule.
Okay.
Speaking of your work session schedule, on February 5th, we have scheduled February 5th as your work session for the joint meeting with our legislative delegation. So our state legislative delegation. We'll have the discussion that night about state legislative items, but we also wanted to use some of that night to have the discussion about the federal legislative items too. And Casey Casella has been working on kind of a draft of that document that we bring to DC every year, that kind of multi-page document. I reviewed a draft of it today, actually, so she's well on the way to getting that ready to go, and you'll have time to take a peek at it and add or subtract to it as well.
And I know Gary Carlson from the League IGR office attended last year and was very pleased to do so. So if we can invite him again, that would be
He got
great.
invited earlier tonight.
Terrific.
So.
I figured Casey was on it.
So he should be there. Let's see. Last thing. This is some long time ago. Councilmember Fisher asked an intriguing question about our affordable housing. And the question was, how do people go about finding it? Didn't seem like an intriguing question perhaps at the time, but it caused a lot of discussion among staff about how do people find it? You know, we've made these little deals with privately owned developments of 5 units here and 10 here and 12 there, but how do people find it? What do they ask for? So we really struck the need. We needed to find a name. We needed to name it something. We needed to brand it somehow. So we went to Stephanie, and Stephanie put us in touch with some folks that she knows in the housing marketing area. And we had a lot of discussion both in-house and with some consulting folks outside, and came up with a branding and program name of Open Doors Edina. This has been run through a lot of vetting already in terms of vetting the name, vetting the internet references. How is it going to look in black and white? How is it going to look in a letterhead? How do we talk about it in the public? But this is what we want to start using as our branding and programmatic reference to our affordable housing program that we helped create here, that you helped create here, and that is really sort of located throughout the community in many different buildings under many different owners. And so you're going to be hearing this term more, you're going to be seeing it more, you're going to be seeing the marks and the branding more. And I just wanted you to get your first look at it tonight. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about the detail of it at the first HRA meeting when we do some of the other organizational items for the HRA next week. And that's all I got.
Okay. And we have a legislative breakfast coming up on the 25th, I think. Okay. Well, we'll have a meeting before that. So, all right. Anything further from council members? Otherwise, we'll stand adjourned.